1. A lone woman navigates the shadows of a desolate alleyway, her heels clicking against the cold pavement. 2. Seeking a moment of relief, she takes a long, desperate gulp from her canned drink. 3. Fueled by liquid courage, she screams into the night that she's finally quitting her job under that absolute monster of a boss. 4. Her moment of defiance is cut short when a sudden, chilling sound causes her to spin around in terror. 5. A massive, hooded figure looms in the darkness, causing her to drop her bag as she realizes she isn't alone. 6. Shaking with fear, she takes a frantic step back, her eyes wide as she tries to process the nightmare before her. 7. The stranger reveals a pair of razor-sharp fangs and glowing eyes, confirming her worst fear. She's facing a real-life vampire. 8. She collapses to the ground, sobbing that she can't believe her life is ending in a place as miserable as this. 9. In a blind panic, she scuttles backward until her back hits the legs of a second, silent observer. 10. She reaches out and grips the stranger's trousers, clinging to them as if they are her last hope for survival. 11. Tears well up in her eyes as she stares into the darkness, pleading for any kind of miracle. 12. She screams for help, begging anyone to save her from the bloodthirsty predator closing in. 13. A familiar, cold voice cuts through the air, asking if she's really desperate enough to seek help from the arrogant president she just cursed. 14. To her absolute shock, her boss, President Kawakita, leans down and tilts her chin up with a terrifyingly calm expression. 15. To understand how she ended up in the clutches of two monsters, we have to travel back exactly 1 month. 16. Back then, Yuka was just another job hunter struggling to survive in a cutthroat corporate market. 17. Her frantic search comes to a sudden halt when something catches her eye on a nearby bulletin board. 18. She stares at a recruitment poster for the SWT group, a massive conglomerate known for its prestige. 19. Her friends catch up, wondering what could possibly make the usually exhausted Yuka look so focused. 20. The poster promises a salary far above the industry standard, making Yuka's eyes sparkle with financial hope. 21. Without a second's delay, she sprints toward the headquarters, determined to secure her future. 22. Her friends watch her go, worried that the legendary competition for the firm will chew her up and spit her out. 23. Yuka arrives at the SWT group lobby, which is packed to the brim with elite candidates vying for a spot. 24. She walks straight to the information desk, asking the receptionist which specific role offers the absolute highest pay. 25. The receptionist points her toward the executive secretary application area, a desk that looks surprisingly vacant. 26. Yuka hand-delivers her resume to the coordinator, confidently stating she can start the very next morning. 27. Outside the building, her friends discover why the position is always open. The turnover rate is unnervingly high. 28. One friend realizes with a pale face that Yuka has just signed up for the most grueling black company role in the city. 29. The next day, Yuka stands before the imposing sign of the president's office, ready to begin her new life. 30. An HR manager escorts her to a desk situated directly outside the CEO's inner sanctum. 31. They are interrupted by the sound of a furious man screaming at his subordinates from behind the closed doors. 32. A terrified employee is literally chased out of the office by a flying book, proving the rumors about the boss were true. 33. Despite her hesitation, the manager firmly pushes Yuka toward the entrance, leaving her no choice but to face the fire. 34. She enters the luxurious office, finding a man sitting in a high-backed chair with his back turned toward her. 35. President Kawakita finally turns around, greeting his new secretary with a gaze that feels like ice. 36. Yuka is momentarily paralyzed by his intense, sharp features, realizing she's working for a man of absolute power. 37. He doesn't offer a warm welcome, instead coldly remarking that he hopes she is at least slightly more competent than the last one. 38. Yuka masks her frustration with a polite smile, reminding herself that she can endure any insult for a paycheck this big. 39. His first command is completely unexpected. He orders her take his favorite plant, Paki, outside for its daily sunlight. 40. She stares at the massive tropical plant, wondering if her new boss is actually insane. 41. Gritting her teeth, she uses every ounce of her strength to drag the heavy pot across the room. 42. During the struggle, she accidentally nicks her arm on a sharp leaf, noticing a tiny drop of blood. 43. Suddenly, Kawakita's composure breaks as he clutches his tie, seemingly overwhelmed by a scent he finds repulsive. 44. He orders her to bandage the tiny scratch immediately and open all the windows to air out the entire office. 45. Yuka is left fuming, unable to believe he's acting like her minor injury has contaminated the entire building. 46. To add insult to injury, he calmly informs her that the cost of the single bandage will be docked from her salary. 47. Over the next week, Yuka is pushed to her breaking point by a never-ending cycle of impossible demands and menial chores. 48. As she prepares to leave for the day, Kawakita stops her, demanding she accompany him to a late-night dinner meeting. 49. When she tries to protest the overtime, He shoots her a look so sharp it completely silences her. 50. She takes a deep breath, trying to psych herself up to survive just one more long night of work. 51. They arrive at a massive, Gothic-style mansion that looks more like a fortress than a business venue. 52. During the event, Yuka reaches for a wine glass, intending to handle the social aspects of the meeting for him. 53. She steps in to drink in his place, fulfilling her role as a professional shield for her demanding boss. 54. She watches him walk away with a cold indifference, her patience for his attitude finally reaching its limit. 55. As she walks through the halls of the mansion, she decides that no amount of money is worth being treated like a servant. 56. Her exit is delayed when she catches a glimpse of Kawakita hiding in a secluded corner of the library. 57. She watches in confusion as he carefully inspects a vial labeled blood bank, his expression unreadable. 58. Her heart sinks as she wonders if his erratic behavior is actually caused by a secret, incurable illness. 59. Later that night, she sits in the passenger seat of his luxury car as they drive back through the city. 60. Looking at him with newfound sympathy, she resolves to be more patient with his outbursts, believing he is suffering in silence. 61. The car suddenly hits a bump, causing the vial of blood to slip from its container and shatter across the floor. 62. Yuka panics as the metallic scent fills the cabin, her mind racing to help her sick boss. 63. Instead of gratitude, Kawakita's eyes darken as he roughly orders her to get out of the vehicle immediately. 64. This brings us back to the present, where Yuka is wandering the streets, still reeling from being kicked out. 65. Meanwhile, at the office, the HR manager is forced to process yet another resignation letter from a staff member who couldn't take the pressure. 66. Back in the alley, Yuka lets out one last scream of frustration, declaring herself officially free from the company. 67. The hooded stalker from before prepares to strike, his fangs fully extended as he prepares for a feast. 68. But before he can move, Kawakita steps into the light, radiating an overwhelming aura of dark energy. 69. The rogue vampire instantly drops to his knees, trembling as he realizes he has accidentally offended a high-ranking noble. 70. With terrifying speed, Kawakita lifts the attacker off the ground by his neck, his strength far beyond human limits. 71. Yuka watches from the ground, her mind reeling as she realizes she's trapped between two supernatural predators. 72. With a single, decisive motion, Kawakita neutralizes the threat, leaving the alley silent once more. 73. He slowly turns his gaze back to Yuka, his eyes glowing with a predatory red light that freezes her blood. 74. Looming over her, he tells her that now that she has seen his true nature, she will never be allowed to leave his side again. Kawakita adjusts his suit with cold precision, looking completely unruffled by the recent chaos. Yuka remains frozen on the ground, watching the shadow of her mysterious boss loom over the alley. She points a trembling finger toward him, her mind racing to process the secret she just witnessed. The president glances back with a stoic expression, his gaze as sharp and unyielding as ever. Seeing an opening, Yuka attempts to bolt for the street, desperate to escape this waking nightmare. Her flight is instantly thwarted as Kawakita snatches her by the collar, treating her escape attempt like a minor nuisance. Realizing she's trapped, Yuka braces herself and decides she must offer a formal gesture of gratitude. He releases his grip, allowing her to stand back on her feet within the dim alleyway. Kawakita stands with his arms crossed, questioning exactly how she plans to settle her debt. Yuka pricks her finger with a sharp pin, drawing a small bead of blood for a proposed payment. She faces him with a mixture of fear and determination, hoping this professional offering will suffice. She extends her hand, presenting the single drop of blood to the noble vampire. Kawakita's eyes narrow as he focuses all his attention on the small crimson offering. Yuka pleads with him to accept the gesture, so she can finally put this encounter behind her. The president leans in, his intense presence making it clear that he isn't finished with her. President Kawakita corners Yuka in his office, his presence overwhelming her as she struggles to maintain her composure. Suddenly, the door creaks open as an unsuspecting secretary enters to deliver the latest documents. The employee freezes in shock, witnessing her boss and Yuka in a compromisingly close position. Panicked by the awkward intrusion, she immediately slams the door shut to give them privacy. Yuka tries to explain that the situation is a complete misunderstanding, but the damage is already done. Kawakita smirks with cold amusement, pointing out that she is still sitting on his lap despite her excuses. Realizing the absurdity of the moment, Yuka quickly scrambles away and rushes out of the room. Left alone, the president contemplates his new secretary, finding her presence more interesting than expected. Later at her desk, Yuka's phone buzzes incessantly with notifications from the company's internal network. Her eyes widen in horror as she reads the wild rumors spreading about her relationship with the boss. She hides behind her phone, mortified that her colleagues think they were getting cozy in the office. In a fit of chibi-fueled rage, she slams her hands down, determined to find out who is posting these lies. She rests her chin on her hand, desperately trying to brainstorm a new strategy to escape this nightmare. A flashback reminds her of Kawakita's ruthless nature, specifically how he docks her pay for every minor mistake. His cold, calculating gaze haunts her thoughts as she considers her limited options. She recalls asking him about overtime pay, only to be met with a dismissive and stern attitude. A light bulb goes off in her head as she realizes that wasting his money might be the fastest way to get fired. As night falls, Yuka walks through the city streets, heading toward Kawakita's residence. She stares intensely at the building, noting how cold and lifeless the atmosphere feels from the outside. Peering into the sterile kitchen, she confirms her suspicion that no one ever actually cooks here. She sighs, acknowledging that a vampire would have no need for human food or a functioning kitchen. Suddenly, a glint of light from a nearby shop catches her attention. The storefront displays a mystical sign promising a wish that will definitely come true. Intrigued and desperate, Yuka wonders if this place holds the solution to her vampire problem. A small bell chimes as she pushes the door open, entering the mysterious establishment. The shop is filled with strange artifacts, and she approaches the counter with a sense of trepidation. A merchant wearing a monocle greets her, claiming he can grant any request for the right price. Yuka leans in close, asking if he has anything that can specifically counter the powers of a vampire. The merchant's eyes light up as he presents her with a specialized demon exorcism talisman. Overjoyed, she pays a steep price for the talisman and a silver dagger, convinced she now has the upper hand. She clutches her new tools with a determined look, ready to finally fight back against her boss. Behind her back, the merchant laughs to himself, satisfied with the easy profit he just made from the gullible girl. Back at the estate, Yuka cautiously navigates the dark hallways under the moonlight. A shadowy figure suddenly lunges out, causing her to cry out in genuine terror. Kawakita catches her from behind, reminding her sternly that it isn't safe for her to walk alone at night. He leans down, whispering a chilling threat about how easily he could snap her fragile neck. Overwhelmed by panic, Yuka instinctively bites down on his arm to force him to release her. The president looks annoyed by the bite, while Yuka fumes at his constant intimidation tactics. She walks away with a huff, secretly preparing to deploy her secret weapon later that night. The sound of rushing water echoes through the bathroom as Kawakita begins his evening shower. Yuka's hand trembles as she slowly turns the handle to the bathroom door, ready to strike. She peeks through the steam and the shower curtain, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal herself. Kawakita finishes his shower and dries off, his back turned to the hidden intruder. His vampire senses alert him to a presence in the room, causing him to pause in suspicion. He turns around, maintaining a strictly professional focus on his routine while draped in a towel. Yuka leaps out from behind the curtain, holding the yellow talisman high with a fierce expression. With a swift movement, she slaps the paper charm directly onto the center of his chest. She folds her hands in a celebratory gesture, fully expecting the exorcism to take immediate effect. Kawakita stares down at the paper stuck to his skin with an expression of utter disbelief and confusion. Yuka boldly declares she isn't afraid anymore, but Kawakita calmly points out that she didn't even stick it on properly. Skeptical, Yuka leans in closer to inspect the talisman, wondering why it hasn't worked yet. She uses her hand to press the charm firmly against his physique to ensure a solid connection. As her hand lingers, she is momentarily distracted by the impressive physical condition of her boss. Kawakita smirks and asks her how it feels to finally touch the man she's been trying to avoid. Horrified by her own stray thoughts, she recoils in a chibi-style panic, shouting at herself internally. Before she can escape, Kawakita reaches out and firmly grips her arm, preventing her retreat. Yuka is stunned that he can move at all, wondering why the merchant's charm has failed her so miserably. The president looms over her, mockingly asking if she actually believed such a simple trick would work on him. Desperate, Yuka tries to maintain her bravado, hinting that she has another secret weapon hidden away. They lock eyes in a tense standoff, neither willing to back down from the confrontation. The useless talisman finally loses its grip and falls away from his chest as if it were nothing. Flustered and defeated, Yuka covers her face and makes a hasty exit from the bathroom. Kawakita watches her leave, his initial annoyance fading into a look of deep contemplation. He reaches out into the empty air, feeling a strange and sudden sense of nostalgia wash over him. He looks down at the fallen talisman, picking it up to examine the strange energy it carries. As he holds the paper, it begins to ignite with a mysterious red flame, reacting to his touch. Gazing into the fire, he wonders if he has encountered this woman before in a long-forgotten memory. Night falls over the majestic Rose Manor, a place steeped in ancient secrets. Inside, a lavish gathering is in full swing, though the air feels heavy with unspoken tension. Suddenly, a frantic man bursts through the gilded doors, calling out for Lord Geoffrey. High upon his ornate throne, Lord Geoffrey sits with a cold, imposing presence, unfazed by the sudden intrusion. He remains perfectly composed, reminding his subordinate that a true leader never loses their cool. With a sharp gaze, he demands to know exactly what disaster has occurred. The messenger reveals the grim news. One of their own was eliminated instantly by a terrifyingly powerful foe. Instead of anger, a dark, intrigued smile creeps across Geoffrey's face. He recalls that the victim was no ordinary vampire, but an evolved one with the rare power to imprint. He leans back, processing the fact that someone managed to overpower such a formidable creature. The report continues, stating the target was a seemingly ordinary human woman who was nearly turned into prey. Geoffrey's fangs glint as he finds the situation becoming more interesting by the second. He stands tall, ordering his men to find this woman immediately, though he's indifferent to whether she survives the encounter. Meanwhile, at a modern residence, the lights glow softly against the night sky. Yuka is practically dancing with joy, thrilled that her newly purchased charms actually seem to work. Her eyes sparkle with newfound hope as she realizes she finally has a weapon against her boss. She grips a specialized dagger, confident that this item will be her ultimate trump card. Flopping onto her bed, she lets out a mischievous giggle while imagining her impending victory. A devious plan begins to take shape in her mind as she stares at the blade. She envisions a world where she holds the dagger to the president's throat, forcing him to submit to her professional demands. In her fantasy, the arrogant president is reduced to a stuttering mess, begging for her forgiveness. She imagines him bowing his head, completely subservient to her every command. The dream intensifies as she pictures them in a tense, high-stakes standoff where she finally holds all the power. Reality hits her like a truck, leaving her red-faced and gasping at her own wild imagination. She clutches her burning cheeks, desperately trying to convince herself she isn't actually distracted by his physical appearance. Just then, the bell on her wrist rings, shattering her private moment of embarrassment. Feeling like a defeated spirit, Yuka trudges down the stairs to answer the summons. The president is already waiting, checking his watch and scolding her for wasting 5 precious minutes. Still caught in her daydream, Yuka accidentally addresses him as master, leaving her frozen in horror. The president's eyes widen in genuine shock at her bizarre choice of words. Inside her head, a mini-devil version of Yuka cheers for finally expressing her inner desire to take charge. An angelic version of herself tries to maintain some dignity, insisting that Yuka should be the one in control. The two inner voices bicker back and forth as Yuka struggles to regain her composure. The president leans back with a smirk, asking if she truly harbors such a strange and specific hobby. Flustered beyond belief, Yuka waves her hands frantically, denying the accusation with every fiber of her being. She quickly fabricates a lie, claiming she was just reciting a line from a drama she recently watched. He watches her carefully, wondering if she was actually trying to get on his good side with such a stunt. Brushing the awkwardness aside, he points toward the kitchen and demands his usual coffee. Yuka scurries off to fulfill the task, annoyed that he treats her like a well-trained servant. She returns and presents the cup, perfectly balanced with just the right amount of milk. Instead of a thank you, he drops a heavy stack of documents on the table, demanding a full summary. Yuka is stunned by the workload, realizing he expects her to finish all of this overnight. He takes a calm sip of his coffee, reminding her that his word is absolute and overtime is mandatory. Burning with silent rage, Yuka realizes she needs administrative access to complete the grueling task. To her surprise, he casually grants her permission to use his personal executive account. Her jaw drops as she sees the sheer level of access and resources now at her fingertips. A dark glint enters her eyes as she realizes this is the perfect opportunity to make him pay. The next morning, the corporate headquarters stands tall, unaware of the chaos Yuka has orchestrated. Yuka peeks around a corner, calling out to her colleague, Mrs. Imada, to initiate her plan. The office worker looks up, surprised to see the secretary during such a busy hour. Yuka rolls in a massive cart overflowing with expensive, beautifully wrapped gift boxes. Mrs. Imada stares in disbelief, wondering what on earth is going on with all this luxury merchandise. With a bright, fake smile, Yuka announces that these are surprise gifts from the president to the entire staff. The office erupts in cheers as employees scramble to grab their unexpected presents. Yuka claps her hands in triumph, delighted that she's finally making the stingy vampire's wallet bleed. Meanwhile, in the boardroom, the atmosphere is freezing as the president's staff trembles in fear. He stares down the representatives of another company, his expression cold and unforgiving. His phone begins to buzz incessantly with one massive withdrawal notification after another. He checks the alerts, immediately deducing that Yuka has gone on a massive shopping spree with his money. The employees notice his mood shift into something truly terrifying, fearing the worst for the meeting. He slams his hand onto the table, his patience having completely evaporated. With a sharp tone, he rejects the proposal outright and orders them to start over from scratch. The frustrated businessman storms out of the office, unable to handle the president's sudden outburst. He shouts back in anger, but the demon president is far more concerned with the secretary who just emptied his bank account. Office workers are bustling about, but a stern man's presence brings a sudden chill to the room. Mr. Kambara from auditing returns from his business trip, radiating an aura of strict professionalism. Yuka's coworker whispers that Kambara is notoriously difficult to get along with. Yuka watches him walk away, realizing this man is the legendary former executive secretary. Despite being warned to stay away, Yuka decides to approach him to learn from his vast experience. Her colleague warns that Kambara is prideful, and getting on his bad side is a one-way ticket to being fired. Yuka flashes a confident, slightly mischievous smirk, already forming a plan to win him over. She politely introduces herself to Mr. Kambara, offering him one of the gifts she bought using the president's account. Kambara stares at the gift, immediately suspicious of how a new secretary could afford such luxury. Yuka maintains a calm facade, though she's sweating internally as he questions her access to the executive account. She tries to play it off as a direct order from the president, handing the box over with forced cheer. Suddenly, President Kawakita appears right behind her, his cold gaze cutting through the conversation. Yuka freezes in shock, not expecting the president to return from his board meeting so early. Panic sets in as she quickly tries to excuse herself to get back to urgent work. Before she can escape, Kawakita grabs her by the collar, lifting her off her feet like a misbehaving kitten. Kambara watches them leave, stunned that the usually emotionless president is showing such a visceral reaction. The auditor turns to the other staff, seeking answers about this mysterious and influential new hire. In the break room, the office ladies gossip wildly, convinced they've just witnessed a scandalous office romance. Kambara catches them mid-gossip, his stern presence immediately silencing the group. The staff scrambles back to their desks, terrified of the auditor's judgmental glare. Kambara narrows his eyes, his mind racing with calculations about the hierarchy of the company. He realizes Yuka is a threat to his own ambitions and decides she must be removed. Back in the office, Kawakita slams the door shut, trapping Yuka in the room with him. Yuka tries to defend her actions, claiming she was just trying to improve the president's public image. Kawakita leans in with a terrifyingly calm smile, noting that no previous secretary ever dared to touch his personal funds. He pins her against the desk, his intensity reaching a breaking point as he demands to know why she thought she could. Trembling, Yuka can barely find the words to respond to his overwhelming aura. He lifts her chin, coldly explaining that only his wife is permitted to use his personal account without permission. He asks her directly if she spent the money with the intention of becoming his bride. Yuka's face turns pale blue in pure horror at the mere suggestion of such a fate. Standing tall, Kawakita declares that since the whole company now thinks they're involved, she has to make amends. Yuka begs for mercy, terrified that he's going to seize her entire salary to pay back the debt. Later that night, the lights of the grand estate shine, but Yuka feels more trapped than ever. She reaches for her bedroom door handle, her heart heavy with the weight of her financial ruin. She laments that her plans to quit and escape have vanished along with her year's wages. A sudden noise from the balcony startles her, making her jump in the middle of the night. She covers her mouth to stay silent, fearing a burglar has infiltrated the mansion. Peeking through the glass, she witnesses a dark figure lurking outside in the shadows. President Kawakita stands over a fallen intruder, coldly telling them to know their place. His eyes glow with a predatory hunger, revealing the true monster hidden beneath the suit. Yuka watches in absolute terror, realizing just how dangerous her master truly is. She hides under her covers, shivering as she remembers that she's living with a literal vampire. Outside, Kawakita crushes a glass vial under his boot, destroying any evidence of the encounter. He looks down at the unconscious, underage vampire who dared to trespass on his territory. He sighs in annoyance, tired of dealing with the influx of out-of-control fledglings. Determined to find a way out, Yuka slips into her heels and prepares to leave the estate. She walks through the dark garden, her mind focused on finding a permanent solution to her vampire problem. She returns to the shady occult shop, greeted by the eccentric shopkeeper. The shopkeeper adjusts his monocle, surprised to see her back so soon for more anti-vampire gear. He leans in close, asking her if she has ever heard of the legendary demon exorcists. He claims an exorcist is the only one powerful enough to truly free her from the president's grip. Yuka hesitates, worried that an exorcist might actually kill Kawakita rather than just helping her escape. The shopkeeper scoffs, explaining that vampires are nearly immortal and incredibly difficult to kill. He hands her a mysterious, dark calling card, urging her to contact the professional. Yuka stares at card, knowing that taking this step will change everything. As she leaves the shop, the bell rings, signaling the start of a dangerous new alliance. Inside, the shopkeeper cringes in fear as a tall, menacing figure looms over him. A mysterious man in a suit holds the shopkeeper's son hostage, using the child to force his cooperation. The man smirks with villainous intent, satisfied that the trap for Yuka has been set. He reaches out a hand toward the terrified boy, asserting his dominance over the situation. The shopkeeper rushes to comfort his son as the intruders finally release their grip. The man tells the shopkeeper to pray that Yuka actually makes the call. Back at the mansion, Yuka stares out the window, unaware of the conspiracy closing in on her. She calls her old friend Eri, trying to act normal despite her life being in shambles. Yuka complains about how they haven't met up since graduation, desperate for a taste of her old life. Eri apologizes, explaining she's been swamped with work but promises to grab dinner soon. Yuka's expression turns grim as she asks her friend how to deal with a dangerous person who hasn't harmed her yet. Taking a deep breath, Yuka calls the number on the card and asks to be put in touch with the exorcist. The shopkeeper answers with a trembling voice, giving her a meeting location for Friday night. As the shopkeeper hangs up, the mysterious suited man stands over him, ensuring the trap is ready to spring. Kawakita bolts upright in the dead of night, his skin slick with a cold sweat. His mind drifts back to a haunting memory of his youth, lying broken and bleeding in a dark forest. Two predatory vampires loom over his small frame, mocking his lack of strength. One brute seizes the boy's arm, eager to drain whatever meager life remains. Terror strikes the attacker as he realizes the boy carries the blood of a high-ranking noble family. Suddenly, enchanted arrows whistle through the air with lethal precision. The projectiles slam into the ground, forcing the startled vampires to recoil. A mysterious figure expertly catches the returning talismans with effortless grace. An older man with glasses steps forward, scolding the pair for their cowardly behavior. The vampires growl in defiance, threatening to make the meddling human their next meal. The young Kawakita watches through blurred vision, barely clinging to consciousness. He struggles to focus on the stranger, who has suddenly intervened in his fate. In a blur of motion, the man moves to strike down the aggressors with supernatural speed. One vampire falls instantly, pinned by the force of the man's mysterious weaponry. The man stands over the survivors, his voice cold as he judges their many crimes. He unleashes a devastating wave of golden energy that carves through the darkness. The vampires are vaporized in a blinding explosion of holy light. With the threat neutralized, the man looks down at the boy with a stoic gaze. The young vampire barks out a warning for the stranger to stay away from him. The man notes with interest that the boy has yet to take a human life. Defiant and scared, the boy snacks that his choices are none of the man's concern. The stranger strokes his chin, contemplating a way to ensure the boy stays on the right path. He proposes a blood contract, demanding a solemn promise in exchange for the boy's life. Golden light erupts from the man's hand as he manifests a powerful magical seal. The young boy can only stare in wonder at the intricate display of power. A glowing crest shaped like a rose imprints itself onto the boy's chest. Confused and overwhelmed, the boy asks about the true nature of this binding agreement. The man explains that this mark will serve as a protective shield until he comes of age. Kawakita sits in the silence of his bedroom, the weight of the past heavy on his shoulders. The rose-shaped art mark on his chest pulses with a faint, ghostly light. He realizes it has been quite some time since that vivid dream returned to haunt him. He recalls a medical warning about how blood bank substitutes can trigger deep-seated memories. He steps out onto the cold floor, his mind racing with thoughts of his long-lost savior. It has been 3 centuries since that fateful night, yet the memory remains crystal clear. Gazing out at the crescent moon, he wonders if that man's lineage still walks the earth. The sun rises over the bustling city, bringing a new day of corporate chaos. Yuka slumps at her desk, her energy completely drained from a night of zero sleep. A coworker approaches with a stack of files, noticing Yuka's clearly exhausted state. Yuka warns her to keep her voice down, as the demon president is currently on the warpath. She leans in to vent about being forced to prepare a 5 a.m. breakfast for her boss. Frustrated, she questions why a vampire even needs a morning meal in the first place. The coworker's face flushes red as she imagines a much more scandalous reason for the early start. Yuka is stunned into silence by the sheer speed of her colleague's wild imagination. The gossiping secretary sprints away, desperate to share this urgent update with the office. Left alone, Yuka feels a mounting sense of dread about the rumors that are sure to follow. She checks her phone and sees the office chat blowing up with news of their supposed night together. Yuka fumes in silence, her brain practically short-circuiting from the social catastrophe. As the clock finally strikes 5, the coworker gleefully celebrates the end of the week. She bids Yuka a cheerful farewell, leaving the secretary to her miserable overtime. Yuka rests her head on her hand, feeling the crushing weight of her double life. Down on the street, Kawakita's luxury car waits patiently for her to emerge. Yuka hesitates by the door, desperately searching for a way to escape another night of work. Kawakita demands she hurry up, claiming there is a mountain of paperwork waiting for them. Yuka stomps her feet in a silent tantrum, cursing her boss's endless demands. Later that night, the scene shifts to a decaying factory hidden in the city's outskirts. The click of Yuka's heels echoes against the concrete as she approaches the dark structure. She shivers at the eerie atmosphere, feeling the isolation of the deserted area. Her hand trembles slightly as she reaches out toward the weathered gate. Steeling her resolve, she steps into the shadows to meet the mysterious exorcist. Back at the apartment, Kawakita glances at the wall clock with growing suspicion. He sits in the dark, realizing that Yuka is far too late to simply be running errands. Yuka arrives at the secluded meeting point, her eyes scanning the dark, silent windows for any sign of life. She leans against the cold brick wall, wondering why an exorcist would choose such a suspicious place to meet. Searching the shadows, she realizes there is no sign of the shopkeeper who promised her answers. Suddenly, a chilling reflection appears in the glass behind her, watching her every move. Unaware of the danger, she pulls out her phone to call her contact and find out what's going on. Her heart skips a beat as a voice whispers from right behind her, far too close for comfort. Before she can react, a hand reaches out, holding a mysterious paper talisman right in front of her face. Stumbling back in a panic, Yuka tries to distance herself from the sudden intruder. A hand descends upon her, and as her vision fades, she realizes she's been lured into a deadly trap. The mysterious man in the suit effortlessly hoists her limp body over his shoulder, questioning her true strength. Miles away, the bell on a spiritual charm begins to glow and ring out a frantic warning. Kawakita strides through the night, his focus shifting as the sudden signal cuts through the air. He stops in his tracks, his expression hardening as he realizes that Yuka is in grave danger. His eyes narrow with a cold, predatory intensity, pinpointing the source of the disturbance. Without a second's hesitation, he pushes off the ground, leaving the pavement behind. The vampire president takes to the skies, leaping across rooftops with supernatural speed to reach her. The scene shifts to a desolate, abandoned factory complex complex where Yuka is being held captive. Yuka slowly regains consciousness, finding herself slumped against a wall in the dimly lit warehouse. She looks up, dazed and confused, as a familiar voice greets her return to the waking world. To her shock, she sees the shopkeeper tied up beside her, looking just as terrified as she feels. She immediately snaps at him, accusing him of dragging her into his shady business dealings. The Kamen scowls, his usual smug demeanor replaced by sheer annoyance at her persistent questions. He pathetically begs for mercy, but Yuka remains focused on getting her money back for his useless items. She briefly recalls the president's strange experiment, feeling more like a toy than an assistant. Looking around the vast, empty factory, she tries to find any way out of this nightmare. She racks her brain, trying to remember if she did anything to earn such a dangerous grudge. A dark memory of a cloaked figure flashes through her mind, heightening her sense of dread. She remembers the night she first encountered a vampire in that dark, narrow alleyway. Crouched low, she whispers to the shopkeeper, wondering if this is a move of pure vengeance for that night. The sound of heavy footsteps echoes through the room as a polished black shoe enters her view. Their captor steps into the light, wearing a sinister smile as he anticipates his upcoming feast. He reaches for the heavy door, ready to corner his prey and finish what he started. A massive wooden crate is suddenly shoved aside, crashing onto the floor with a loud thud. The man punches through the debris, surprised by the spirited resistance coming from his captives. He steps over the tangled mess of ropes on the ground, his patience beginning to wear thin. He looks down at the discarded bindings, realizing they managed to free themselves while he was distracted. A cruel grin spreads across his face as he prepares to hunt them down for some pre-meal exercise. 30 minutes earlier, Yuka was desperately using a small blade to saw through the shopkeeper's restraints. Once free, she whispered a plan to split up and maximize their chances of escaping the building. They paused at the exit, checking the perimeter to ensure the coast was clear before making a move. Yuka gave a determined nod, deciding they shouldn't leave without giving their captor a little surprise. Back in the present, Yuka hides on the roof, hoping her unconventional escape route will outsmart the hunter. She realizes her phone was stolen, but she tightly grips a small dagger as her only line of defense. Looking up at the full moon, she prays that the president realizes she's missing before it's too late. She braces herself, her heart hammering against her ribs as she listens for any approaching footsteps. Below her, the shopkeeper makes a break for it, sprinting across the open courtyard in a panic. The hunter appears like a ghost right behind the fleeing man, his movements blurring with speed. Yuka watches from above, covering her mouth to stifle a scream as the trap is sprung. The man in the suit corners the shopkeeper, mocking him for thinking he could ever truly escape. The attacker turns his cold gaze toward the roof, announcing that Yuka is the next one on his list. Yuka's eyes widen in absolute terror as she realizes she has been spotted by the monster. She peeks through the darkness, seeing the predator's gaze lock onto her position. She trembles, realizing this man is far more savage and ruthless than any vampire she's met. A heavy foot slams down onto the roof tiles as the predator begins his final ascent. He strides across the rooftop with arrogant ease, taunting her to come out and face her end. His long shadow stretches across the crates, slowly creeping toward Yuka's hiding spot. A pale hand reaches out, slowly sliding a heavy crate aside to reveal what lies behind. He finds her huddled in the corner, and she looks up with the face of someone who has run out of options. He offers a terrifying ultimatum, promising that her suffering will only increase if she continues to resist. Yuka's fear turns into a sharp, desperate resolve as she prepares one last act of defiance. She lunges forward with all her might, driving her small dagger into the man's shoulder. The hunter snarls in pain, his face contorting with rage as he realizes he was actually wounded. Seizing the moment, Yuka sprints to the edge of the roof, choosing a leap of faith over his touch. She tilts backward into the open air, her body falling away from the rooftop and into the darkness. As she plummets, Yuka closes her eyes, frustrated that she never got the chance to settle her scores. She accepts her fate, her breath hitching as the ground rushes up to meet her. Suddenly, a powerful hand catches her mid-fall, securing her safely against a strong, familiar chest. Yuka's eyes widen in disbelief as she finds herself suspended in mid-air after her desperate leap from the factory roof. Kawakita catches her with professional precision, breaking her fall before she hits the pavement. She gazes up at her savior, her heart still racing from the near-death experience. The president looks down with a stern, focused expression, ensuring his employee is unharmed. Still dazed, Yuka tentatively reaches out to confirm this isn't just a dying hallucination. Kawakita maintains his composure, telling her to stay focused and keep her hands steady. He lands gracefully, carrying her away from the immediate danger zone. Overwhelmed by the situation, Yuka hides her face in her hands to compose herself. High above on the factory roof, the hunter stares down in utter confusion. He grits his teeth, sensing an overwhelming aura of power radiating from the man below. The hunter can't fathom why a high-level vampire would go to such lengths to protect a human. Desperate for answers, the hunter leaps from the heights to confront them directly. He lands with a thud, demanding to know why a noble bloodline is interfering with his hunt. Kawakita stands his ground, making it clear that his business is none of the hunter's concern. The hunter sneers, suggesting that perhaps Kawakita is simply claiming the girl as his own prey. Yuka flinches at the suggestion, suddenly worried about the true nature of her boss's appetite. Kawakita's gaze turns cold as he asserts that no one has the right to question his authority. The hunter refuses to back down, citing the backing of his powerful organization. He reveals a mysterious mark on his hand, claiming to serve under the notorious Lord Jeffrey. Ignoring the threats, Kawakita raises his hand and commands Yuka to brace herself. A massive surge of crimson energy erupts, illuminating the dark factory yard. After the initial blast, Kawakita notices Yuka's tight grip and asks her to maintain a professional distance. Yuka quickly steps back, apologizing for her reflexive grab during the chaos. She ducks behind a wooden crate, cheering for the president to finish the job. Kawakita unleashes his full power, a swirling vortex of energy surrounding his silhouette. The hunter recoils in terror, realizing the sheer gap in their combat capabilities. Sensing certain defeat, the hunter turns tail and sprints away into the shadows. Kawakita watches the retreating figure with a look of calm, calculated indifference. He fires a precision beam of energy that strikes the fleeing hunter with devastating force. The impact sends the hunter crashing face first onto the hard ground. Wounded and gasping for air, the hunter clutches his chest in agony. In a final act of desperation, he hurls a glowing energy disc toward his opponents. The projectile zips through the air, aimed directly at the defenseless Yuka. Kawakita moves like a blur, intercepting the attack just before it reaches her. A violent explosion rocks the area as the two powers collide in a flash of light. Taking advantage of the smoke, the hunter transforms into a bat and flees into the night sky. With the threat gone, Yuka approaches her boss to discuss the gravity of the situation. Kawakita turns his attention back to her, stating that they now have their own matters to settle. He leans in close, questioning her true motives for coming to such a dangerous place. Yuka looks away, unable to admit she was searching for a way to defeat him. He gently lifts her chin, demanding she speak up and be honest about her thoughts. To deflect his interrogation, Yuka points out how remarkably handsome he looks in the moonlight. The sudden compliment catches the stoic president completely off guard. Kawakita's face flushes with a rare hint of embarrassment at her unexpected words. Yuka quickly apologizes, realizing her attempt at a distraction might have been too bold. He stares at her intensely, asking for the real meaning behind her sudden change in attitude. She insists that she wasn't trying to tease him, but simply stating a fact. Yuka reflects on the overwhelming power she just witnessed, realizing how outmatched she truly is. She frets over her next move, worried about how to navigate her relationship with a vampire. Kawakita gives her a light reprimand, calling her an idiot for putting herself in harm's way. Yuka realizes with a start that he had seen through her reckless plan from the beginning. He waves his hand dismissively, signaling that it's time for them to head back home. As they walk, Yuka explains that her actions were driven by a simple desire for freedom. The sound of their footsteps echoes through the quiet night as they leave the factory behind. Her voice trembles as she finally brings up the terrifying sight she witnessed in his garden. She describes the gruesome scene of a blood-covered body she found previously. Kawakita listens patiently as she recounts the trauma that led to her distrust. He sighs, calling her an idiot once more for misunderstanding the situation. Yuka huffs in frustration, tired of being insulted after such a harrowing night. He explains that if he intended to harm her, he would never have gone to such lengths to save her. He reveals the truth about a young, out-of-control vampire who had tried to steal his resources. Yuka is stunned to learn that the meal he referred to wasn't a living person. A vision of a medical blood bag appears, clarifying his actual dietary source. She looks at him with newfound curiosity, asking if he relies solely on medical supplies rather than humans. Yuka looks up at her boss, realizing his true intentions for keeping her close. She asks him directly if all of this was just an elaborate plan to ensure her safety. Kawakita remains silent, his expression unreadable as the night breeze rolls by. He scoffs at her question, calling her the most naive person he's ever had to deal with. Despite his harsh words, Yuka smiles, genuinely believing he is a good-hearted vampire. She blushes slightly while offering a sincere thank you for his timely rescue. Kawakita closes his eyes, struggling to understand the protective instinct he feels toward her. Yuka breaks the silence by asking for a lift, wondering if he can carry her through the sky. She reminds him that he arrived earlier by swooping down like a dark shadow from above. Kawakita leans in, asking if she truly possesses no fear of his supernatural nature. She admits that while others terrify her, she feels a strange sense of security in his presence. The CEO can only stare back in stunned silence at her unexpected confession. He turns his gaze away, trying to hide the fact that her words have affected him. Yuka cheerfully points out that he has already saved her life on 2 separate occasions. She wonders aloud if vampires, much like humans, can be judged by their individual character. Kawakita looks down at his hand, contemplating the weight of her innocent perspective. Without another word, he scoops her up and warns her that he'll drop her if she keeps talking. The two share a brief, tense moment as he prepares for their departure. With a powerful burst of strength, Kawakita's foot leaves the ground with a heavy thud. They launch into the air, leaving Yuka startled by the sudden change in altitude. She clings tightly to his suit as they soar through the cold night air. Under the glow of the crescent moon, the vampire carries his secretary far above the trees. Back at the scene of the battle, the quiet industrial area remains bathed in shadow. A pair of sharp high heels click against the pavement as a new figure arrives. A mysterious blonde woman kneels, frustrated that she arrived too late to witness the clash. She senses a massive lingering wave of power, realizing this was no ordinary vampire dispute. Far away in a lavish estate, a frantic subordinate rushes through the grand halls. He enters the throne room with a look of pure panic etched across his face. Lord Jeffrey sits calmly on his ornate throne, seemingly unfazed by the night's events. He examines a small scratch on his hand, a memento from his brush with the hunters. His servant asks if he intends to heal the wound immediately with his powers. Jeffrey lets out a sinister smile, deciding to keep the mark as a reminder of his mission. He dismisses his subordinate's failure by tossing a mysterious wooden box toward him. The servant catches the gift, marveling at the strength of the protector guarding Yuka. Jeffrey crosses his arms, already plotting his next move to reclaim what is his. He commands a full investigation into the connection between the girl and the elusive Duke. A predatory grin spreads across his face as his obsession with the hunt grows. The subordinate breaks into a cold sweat, terrified by his master's intense aura. He opens the box to reveal a pulsating heart, a grim reward for his continued service. Meanwhile, Kawakita arrives back at the residence, carrying a now slumbering Yuka. He gently tells her they have arrived, though she remains deep in her dreams. Yuka stirs slightly, leaning into the warmth of her boss's shoulder. Nearby, a group of mischievous bats hang from a branch, giggling at the sight. Kawakita shoots the meddling creatures a terrifying glare that promises a swift end. Terrified by his killing intent, the bats immediately scatter into the night. He carries her through the hallway, maintaining a strictly professional grip on his tired assistant. He moves to place her down, his movements careful and calculated. For a fleeting moment, he notes that she looks surprisingly peaceful while asleep. The moonlight catches the small bell on her wrist, a tool that proved vital today. Yuka finally opens her eyes, complaining about her sleep being interrupted so abruptly. Her heart skips a beat when she realizes just how close the president's face is to her own. Kawakita turns his head away, his face flushed with a rare moment of visible embarrassment. Yuka sits up quickly, trying to process the confusing events of the evening. She gasps as the realization hits her that this isn't just another strange dream. Kawakita stands up and sternly tells her to get some proper rest for the night. Watching him walk away, Yuka wonders if the president actually hit his head during the fight. He stops at the door, coldly reminding her that she still has a mountain of paperwork due tomorrow. Yuka fumes in her chibi form, annoyed that he went right back to being a demanding boss. She looks down at the bell on her wrist, questioning if it really glowed red earlier. As she drifts back to sleep, she wonders about the true secret behind the silver trinket. Yuka is buried under a mountain of paperwork, grumbling about her overwhelming workload. She mutters about the harsh exploitation of the corporate world, her fingers flying across the keys in frustration. Even with her back turned, she can't ignore the disciplined presence of the man behind her. Kawakita maintains a rigorous fitness routine, focusing entirely on his workout. Sweat beads on his brow as he finishes his set, his expression intensely focused. Yuka turns around and immediately becomes flustered, demanding he dress appropriately for the office environment. He simply reaches for a drink, his movements calm and deliberate. He tells her plainly that any attempt to flatter him is a complete waste of effort. Yuka tries to argue, claiming she's never once tried to get on his good side, but she suddenly freezes, a look of pure realization washing over her face. On her screen, she's accidentally typed out a repetitive mantra about his appearance, leaving her mortified. A sudden phone call from someone named Eri breaks the tension. Yuka answers with a bright smile, thrilled to finally hear from her senior. Eri is just finishing up a business trip and suggests they grab dinner together. Yuka looks over at the president, mentioning she needs to see if she's allowed to leave. On the other end, Eri is baffled that her junior has to ask for permission like a child. Kawakita prepares a drink, seemingly ignoring the conversation until his own phone rings. Yuka sheepishly asks if she can head out, while Eri's confusion grows. He pauses, his attention shifting entirely to the urgent news appearing on his screen. A report of something suspicious demands his immediate investigation. Without a second thought, he tells the caller he's on his way. He quickly pulls on his suit jacket, preparing to head out into the field. He gives Yuka a stern warning to stay in crowded areas and avoid being alone. As he disappears down the hall, Yuka watches him go, stunned by his sudden change in demeanor. Meanwhile, at a quiet cafe, the stage is set for a long-awaited reunion. Eri pulls Yuka into a warm, sisterly embrace, having missed her junior dearly. They settle in for tea, but the conversation quickly turns to Yuka's current situation. Eri asks point-blank who Yuka was with just moments ago. Yuka struggles to find the right words, her face heating up as she tries to explain. Eri grows suspicious, wondering if Yuka is being taken advantage of by someone powerful. Yuka's mind flashes back to the president's workout, making her feel like the guilty one. Seeing her distress, Eri gently pats her head to calm her down. In a different time and place, a search is underway in a small village. A man in a sharp suit approaches a local girl carrying a flower vase. He claims to be an antique collector, asking if she recognizes the specific pattern on her pottery. The girl explains that she carved the roses herself, purely for decoration. The man stares at her, his hope of finding a clue fading instantly. His subordinate, Chaos, steps in to offer a generous price for the vase anyway. The girl is confused, wondering if her amateur work is actually valuable. The lead investigator turns away, his mind already moving to the next lead. Chaos finalizes the purchase, trying to maintain a professional front. The man walks off, disappointed that this lead turned out to be another dead end. Chaos notices a small bell hanging from the man's hand. He asks if it's a synced intro bell, a precious keepsake from the man's mother. The man snaps back, telling Chaos to stop asking unnecessary questions. He looks off into the distance, his expression clouded with memories of a certain woman. Back in the present, the bell on Yuka's wrist suddenly begins to ring on its own. She clutches her hand, wondering if the president is signaling for her. Aries' expression sharpens as she senses the unmistakable presence of a vampire. She realizes the supernatural energy she felt earlier wasn't a mistake. She grabs Yuka's arm, demanding to know why the bell is ringing without being moved. Aries stares intensely, her protective instincts kicking into high gear. She reminds Yuka of their long history and the promise to never keep secrets from one another. Yuka takes a nervous sip of her tea, trying to play it cool while under her senior's intense scrutiny. Aerie narrows her eyes, her gaze sharp enough to pierce through any facade Yuka might be putting up. The conversation takes a dark turn as Aerie brings up the chilling rumors of vampire sightings that have been plaguing the city lately. Yuka forces a laugh, desperately trying to dismiss the supernatural talk as nothing more than the plot of a trashy novel. Aerie reminds her that as a history teacher, she knows these legends are rooted in a reality far older than the city itself. She reveals a shocking detail. Their own hometown of Delis was once a notorious gathering place for vampires. This revelation sends Yuka into a spiral of doubt, wondering if her constant run-ins with the undead are more than just bad luck. A terrifying thought crosses her mind, leading her to wonder if she might actually have vampire blood flowing through her veins. Aerie senses the sudden shift in the atmosphere, noting the intense worry etched across her junior's face. Trembling, Yuka looks up and asks for confirmation that she is indeed 100% human. The sheer absurdity of the question causes Aerie to nearly choke on her drink in surprise. Aerie immediately shuts down the theory, insisting that her own skills would have helped her catch a vampire long ago. Relieved, Yuka leans toward her senior, finding comfort in the older woman's confident assurance. However, the doubt lingers as she recalls how standard anti-vampire tools failed to work on the powerful beings she's encountered. She pumps her fist with newfound resolve, deciding that she needs to conduct her own investigation into these mysteries. Aerie can only sigh and rub her temples, exhausted by Yuka's sudden burst of reckless energy. Later that night at the Silver Bullet bar, Aerie meets with a mysterious silver-haired ally to discuss the day's events. She voices her concerns about whether keeping the truth hidden is really what's best for Yuka's safety. Her companion agrees that while they can be cautious, they have no control over where fate will eventually lead the young woman. Their private conversation is interrupted by the arrival of a rugged, bearded man at the entrance. He makes his presence known, greeting the duo as they sit at the bar with their drinks. Aerie acknowledges him with a stern look, ready to move on to the more professional matters at hand. The bearded man wastes no time, signaling for them to follow him as they leave their drinks behind. The trio descends into a hidden, stone-walled chamber that feels like a relic from a forgotten era. Aerie cautiously pushes the heavy wooden door open, completely unprepared for the sight inside. The room is dimly lit by flickering candles, but the platform they were meant to inspect is hauntingly empty. A solitary shadow stretches across the stone floor, highlighting the absence of their crucial evidence. The bearded man stares in disbelief, questioning if they are simply looking at thin air where a body should be. Aerie's silver-haired companion realizes that an intruder took advantage of a small opening to steal the corpse. The bearded man is stunned, knowing that the magic circles in place should have made it impossible for a vampire to enter. Aerie and her colleague conclude that they are now being targeted by someone deeply connected to the vampire world. Deep in the woods, hooded figures mourn over a fallen comrade, horrified by the brutality of his end. A masked man stands over them, claiming that this tragedy is proof that his information about the enemy was correct. One of the followers vows revenge, convinced that Yuka conspired with vampires to eliminate his brother. The masked mastermind hides a sinister smirk, pleased that his manipulation is working exactly as planned. Chaos directs the group, instructing the fake exorcists to incite the locals into a frenzy to hunt down the vampire. He looks on with a cold, calculating gaze, seeing this as the perfect opportunity to corner his rival. The masked subordinate suggests using Yuka as bait, knowing her importance will lure their target into the open. He acknowledges that they owe a debt to the Silver Bullet organization for the damage already dealt to Lord Jeffrey. Back at home, Yuka sits at her vanity, her mind still racing with the day's unsettling theories. She pulls at her lips and checks her reflection, searching for any signs of fangs that might prove her fears. Looking out at the night sky where bats are circling, she tries to make sense of the chaotic events surrounding her. Suddenly, a chilling laugh echoes through the room, causing her to freeze in sheer terror. She whirls toward the window, shouting at the bats outside and accusing them of mocking her. To her complete shock, Kawakita is standing right behind her, his reflection appearing in the mirror. Startled, Yuka clutches her chest and scolds him for sneaking up on her without saying a word. Kawakita leans in close, offering a professional transformation service if she truly desires to join the vampire ranks. Flustered and embarrassed, Yuka waves her hands frantically to clear up the massive misunderstanding. Kawakita watches her reaction with an unreadable expression, his presence looming over her in the quiet room. He moves in for a close inspection of her neck, maintaining a strictly professional focus on her physical condition. Kawakita leans in with a predator's focus, leaving Yuka frozen in place. He quickly pulls back, admitting with a smirk that he was only playing a joke on her. Frustrated by his games, Yuka pushes the billionaire away and scolds his terrible personality. She gingerly touches her neck, letting out a sigh of relief that she's still in one piece. Yuka clenches her fist, warning him that her patience for his teasing is wearing thin. Kawakita simply adjusts his tie, wearing a smug expression as he challenges her next move. Pointing aggressively toward the kitchen, Yuka threatens to unplug his fridge and spoil his entire stash of blood. Kawakita rubs his temple in disbelief, reminding her that his supply is delivered fresh every single day. He steps back into her personal space, suggesting that even if the fridge fails, he has a backup nearby. He leans down to her level, explaining that while human blood usually makes him ill, he might make an exception for hers. Yuka stares up at him, her mind racing as she tries to decipher his true intentions. Kawakita rests a firm hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her in the tense moment. Looking him straight in the eyes, she asks if a vampire like him is plagued by constant hunger. His gaze turns sharp and analytical, his piercing eyes searching for the reason behind her question. Maintaining a firm grip, he asks what could have possibly led her to such a conclusion. Yuka explains her theory, noting that if he can survive on stored blood, there is no need to hunt. She reflects on the night everything changed, the moment his secret identity was finally laid bare. A dark memory flashes back, showing the terrifying moment she was cornered by a different, feral vampire in the streets. She looks toward the refrigerator, knowing it contains the strictly regulated nutrition he relies on. Kawakita turns his head away, listening as she describes hunger as a basic instinct for all living things. Standing at the counter, the CEO pours himself a glass of the deep red liquid. Yuka approaches him, observing that despite his supernatural nature, he works harder than any human she knows. She points out the glaring contradiction between his status as a predator and his role as a protector. A shadow falls over Kawakita's face as he absorbs the weight of her observations. He shuts down the conversation immediately, dismissing her deep thoughts as nothing more than wild speculation. Walking away with an air of cold authority, he warns her not to cross the professional line again. Yuka watches him leave, convinced that he's only acting cold to avoid a topic that hit too close to home. She clutches her face in embarrassment, wondering why she always speaks before thinking things through. Suddenly, a noise from the entrance catches her attention, snapping her back to reality. She turns toward the doorway, curious about who could be visiting at this hour. A company assistant struggles through the door, carrying a mountain of paperwork that towers over his head. Yuka's jaw drops in horror as she realizes the sheer volume of work being dumped on her. The assistant drops the heavy stack, relaying the president's order to focus on work instead of delusions. Slumping over the massive pile of documents, Yuka realizes this is her boss's petty way of getting even. The scene shifts to the peaceful grounds of a local animal welfare center. Yuka meets up with her senior, Eri, who is thrilled to finally be back from her long business trip. Eri beams with joy, glad that she can finally settle down in the city for a while. Eri's mind flashes back to a serious briefing regarding the Shaketsu organization's movements in Aura's city. Unaware of the danger, Yuka claps her hands together, excited to spend more time with her friend. Eri kneels down to pet a small black cat, surrounded by the shelter's many residents. A close-up shows a brush moving through the soft fur of a kitten as they continue their talk. Yuka hesitantly asks if it's possible for some vampires to actually be good people. Eri's expression turns dead serious, her eyes losing their previous warmth. She explains that the sheer power and longevity of vampires often turn them into arrogant, cruel monsters. Placing a hand on Yuka's head, Eri warns her to never forget how dangerous these beings truly are. A passing staff member trips nearby, sending a flurry of documents flying into the air. Yuka rushes to help, gathering the scattered papers from the ground. As she stacks the pages, a specific name on the top sheet catches her eye. The document reveals a massive donation agreement signed by none other than Kawakita Kazuya. Yuka is stunned, unable to reconcile the image of a bloodthirsty vampire with a secret philanthropist. She hands the paperwork back to the staff member, her mind reeling from the discovery. A pair of polished boots approaches the group, signaling the arrival of a newcomer. The silver-haired hunter arrives, greeting Eri with a casual familiarity. He turns his attention toward Yuka, his eyes full of curiosity as he asks for an introduction. Eri immediately steps in front of Yuka, her protective instincts flaring as she warns him to keep his distance. Ken looks on with a pained expression, questioning why someone could be so heartless. Before the drama can escalate, a miniature Eri drags him away, reminding him of their long history together. The silver-haired man waves a cheerful goodbye to Yuka as he's hauled off by his collar. Watching them go, Yuka can't help but notice the deep level of Eri seems to have in the newcomer. Her imagination begins to run wild, wondering if the two are actually caught up in a secret romance. Eri cuts the pleasantries short, sternly telling Ken to leave if he doesn't have official business to attend to. Ken's demeanor shifts instantly as he mentions a strange discovery regarding a corpse found by their organization. The gravity of the situation hits Eri immediately, her eyes widening at the news. Ken leans in close, noting that Eri's unusual obsession with a human girl is bound to raise eyebrows. Eri remains silent, her profile hardening as she considers the implications of her actions. A cold smile plays on Ken's lips as he brings up their sacred mission as members of the Silver Bullet. They stand face to face, bound by a vow to purge the world of vampires and protect humanity at any cost. Ken reminds her that every member must possess the resolve to abandon even their own family for the cause. Airi stares him down, asking if he still carries any regret for the events of their past. Refusing to dwell on the memory, Ken turns his back and tells her to stop wasting time with useless chatter. Airi approaches Yuka one last time, explaining that an urgent matter requires her immediate attention. Yuka gives a friendly wave, wishing them luck with their sudden departure. Seeing Yuka's dazed expression, Airi gives her a sharp poke to the forehead to snap her out of her fantasies. Her tone turns deadly serious as she leans in to deliver a final warning. Never trust a vampire. Yuka promises to be careful as she watches her friend disappear into the distance. Ken steals one last glance over his shoulder, convinced that his path and Yuka's will cross again very soon. Now left alone at the shelter, Yuka focuses her energy on grooming one of the resident cats. Deep in the shadows, a pair of polished shoes remain stationary as someone watches her every move. Ken lingers just out of sight, his curiosity about the secretary growing with every passing second. After a long afternoon of volunteer work, Yuka stretches her arms out in triumph. She bids a fond farewell to her feline friends before heading back toward the exit. Just as she's leaving, she catches a glimpse of a familiar figure in a suit walking away in the distance. She pauses, her heart racing as she tries to place where she's seen those shoulders before. She stares at the door, convinced it's impossible for someone like Mr. Kambara to be at a stray cat shelter. She laughs off the idea, telling herself a ruthless vampire would never bother helping helpless animals. But as the thought lingers, a look of genuine doubt begins to cloud her face. Yuka sits at her desk back at the office, unable to focus on her paperwork as Era's warnings echo in her mind. Determined to find the truth, she decides it's time to conduct a private investigation into the company's records. Her train of thought is broken when Mr. Kambara suddenly appears, asking if the president is currently available. Yuka jumps in her seat, completely startled by the older man's silent and sudden approach. Kambara fixes his glasses, lecturing her on how a secretary's reputation reflects directly on the CEO's image. He towers over her, demanding to know why she isn't taking her professional duties more seriously. When Yuka tries to play nice, he coldly shuts her down, telling her to skip the clumsy flattery. Yuka fumes as he walks away, frustrated by his constant lack of warmth and professional distance. She watches him retreat down the hall, realizing he's her only lead to Kawakita's secret activities. Setting her annoyance aside, she follows him closely, refusing to let this opportunity slip away. She catches up to him in the corridor and asks why he seems to have so much free time on his hands. With a forced smile, she suggests they grab lunch together so she can learn more about the job. She trails behind him into the cafeteria, hoping a meal will finally loosen his tongue. As they sit down to eat, Kambara remains blunt, questioning if she even understands the gravity of the things he says. Kambara's stern face looms as Yuka directly questions if the president has been using him as a proxy for animal donations. Kambara's hand freezes mid-air, the specific question clearly catching him off guard. Yuka continues eating casually, mentioning that she heard the news from a very reliable source. Kambara stares at her intensely, asking if she knows why every previous secretary ended up quitting. He explains that they all made the fatal mistake of prying into the president's private life without knowing their place. He makes it crystal clear that no matter what she asks, he will never answer a single question about his boss. Yuka looks down at her plate, finally realizing that Kawakita protects his boundaries with ironclad loyalty. She remains quiet, acknowledging the sharp warning she just received from the veteran assistant. Kambara stands up and departs, leaving Yuka alone to process the heavy atmosphere of the office. Kawakita stares at his phone with a cold, calculating gaze, now fully aware that his secretary is prying into his life. Kawakita stares intensely at his phone, his mind clearly occupied by a pressing executive matter. Back in the office, Kambara observes Yuka's satisfied expression with a knowing and suspicious smirk. Caught off guard, Yuka tries to hide her flustered reaction as she turns away from her computer station. A friendly colleague interrupts the tension, presenting a delicious-looking slice of strawberry cake as a gift. Yuka leans in close, whispering a warning to keep their voices down to avoid another lecture from the higher-ups. The colleague smiles warmly, hoping the sweet treat will serve as a well-deserved reward for Yuka's hard work. Secretly, the coworker plots to use the dessert as a bribe to fish for any new office gossip Yuka might have. A light bulb goes off in Yuka's head as she realizes this cake could be her perfect tactical entry back into the president's office. She stares at the glistening strawberry on top, deciding to sacrifice her snack to facilitate a meeting with the CEO. Her colleague is thrilled by the selfless gesture, cheering Yuka on with an enthusiastic and supportive pose. Balancing the plate carefully, Yuka makes her way toward the heavy, intimidating doors of the executive suite. From around the corner, her coworker watches with bated breath to see if the president will actually accept the offering. Yuka pauses at the entrance, her hand hovering over the handle as she tries to gather her professional courage. She presses her ear against the wood, frustrated that the perfect soundproofing is blocking out every word of the conversation inside. Inside the room, Kawakita sits regally while Kambara delivers a detailed report on Yuka's recent prying questions. Kambara warns that they shouldn't let her curiosity set a dangerous precedent, as human desires tend to grow out of control. Kawakita looks thoughtful and slightly amused, realizing his secretary is becoming increasingly focused on his private life. Kambara is confused by the president's quiet mumble, asking him to clarify his stance on the situation. Folding his hands with a serious expression, Kawakita instructs his assistant to provide her with just enough information to satisfy her for now. Kambara bows deeply, reaffirming his absolute loyalty and promising never to betray the president's trust. The meeting concludes as Kambara turns to exit the private office with a stern look. Behind his glasses, Kambara's eyes sharpen with the resolve to protect his position as the president's indispensable right-hand man. The door swings open abruptly, nearly colliding with Yuka, who was lurking just outside the frame. In the sudden panic of being caught, Yuka loses her footing and watches in horror as the cake begins to fly. Before she can tumble to the floor, a firm hand reaches out to steady her by the shoulder. Kawakita steps out to catch her personally, though the strawberry cake isn't so lucky and splats onto the carpet. Kambara immediately snaps at her, demanding to know why she is loitering outside the office door. Looking downcast and embarrassed, Yuka explains that she only wanted to share a gift with the president to show her appreciation. Kambara points a finger accusingly, suspecting that her gift is merely a cover for a much more calculated motive. Kawakita cuts through the argument with authority, calmly telling Yuka to follow him into the room. He leads her away from the mess, signaling for her to stay close as they move deeper into the office. Left alone in the hallway, Kambara sees with frustration as he watches the two walk away together. Yuka trails behind her boss, wondering about the strange and intense relationship between him and his assistant. Suddenly, Kawakita turns around and reaches out toward her with surprising and efficient speed. Before she can protest the breach of protocol, he lifts her off the ground in a swift bridal carry. He carries her across the room and carefully places her down on the plush office sofa for an inspection. Kneeling before her, he begins a strictly technical assessment of her ankle to check for any potential injuries. Yuka's face flushes a bright red as she insists that she's perfectly fine and doesn't need such close attention. Kawakita's gaze remains cold and analytical as he finishes his thorough medical check. For a brief moment, Yuka is touched, wondering if the president is actually being considerate of her well-being. Her hopes are immediately dashed when he coldly explains that an injury would simply interfere with her professional duties. Fuming at his robotic logic, Yuka storms out of the office, annoyed that she ever thought he was being kind. Meanwhile, the eavesdropping colleague is already planning to report the Princess Carrie to the rest of the staff. Back inside, Kawakita stands alone in silence, staring down at the ruined cake still lying on the floor. Later that evening, Yuka walks through the brightly lit city streets, still dwelling on the day's frustrating events. She spots a young girl standing outside a storefront, looking tired while clutching a large bouquet of roses. Concerned by the late hour, Yuka approaches the child and offers to buy out her remaining stock so she can go home. The little girl beams with joy, thanking her big sister for the incredibly generous gesture. Yuka decides to accompany the girl, worried that it's far too dangerous for a child to be out alone at night. They walk through a quiet residential alley as the girl points toward her home, just past the next street. Yuka stops at the edge of the dark path, making sure the girl feels safe to walk the final few steps. The two part ways under the dim glow of the night sky, with Yuka deciding it's time to head back as well. Yuka offers a final, friendly wave, glad to have helped the young flower seller reach her destination. In the deep shadows of a nearby building, a sinister hand reaches out toward the unsuspecting child. A muffled cry is cut short as a mysterious figure ambushes the girl, covering her mouth to prevent any noise. High above the city, the lights of a grand mansion glow peacefully, unaware of the abduction occurring nearby. Yuka finally arrives home, calling out a cheerful greeting while clutching her massive bouquet of roses. She is surprised to find Kawakita waiting for her, holding a brand new, boxed strawberry cake as a replacement. Offering her flowers as a peace offering in return, Yuka invites the president to help himself to the roses. A beautifully wrapped cake sits on the table, a peace offering for the evening's chaos. Kawakita stands tall, admiring the bouquet of roses with a cold, refined elegance. Yuka erupts in a chibi-style tantrum as the CEO playfully keeps the flowers out of her reach. Despite the bickering, they briefly share a quiet moment as their hands meet on the bouquet. Yuka quickly retracts, blushing as she apologizes for losing her temper while clutching the cake box. A rare, subtle smirk plays on Kawakita's lips as he teases her about her height and volume. Dismissing his comments, Yuka dives into her snack with a grumpy but determined expression. She takes a bite, the sweetness finally offering a moment of reprieve from the tension. Curiosity takes over as she looks back, wondering why her boss isn't parting in the treats. Kawakita's gaze softens into a pensive stare, lost in a memory he can't quite grasp. He leans in, catching her off guard by tasting a bit of the frosting right then and there. Yuka can't help but chuckle at his sudden, uncharacteristic move. He lingers on the taste, admitting it's been a lifetime since he last had something so sweet. A shadow of a headache crosses his face as he tries to recall a childhood memory of a birthday cake. Panic sets in for Yuka, who suddenly worries if a vampire's constitution can even handle human food. She frantically urges him to spit it out, terrified she's accidentally poisoned her employer. Kawakita regains his composure, dryly suggesting she should be more concerned about her own calories. The mood shifts back to playful bickering as Yuka huffs at his constant need to get the last word. Her heart stops for a completely different reason as her eyes fixate on the television screen. She sits frozen on the sofa, the remote forgotten in her hand as the news begins to play. In the background, Kawakita remains professional, attending to an urgent business call. The atmosphere in the room turns ice cold as the broadcast details a gruesome discovery. The screen displays the tragic image of the flower girl, lying lifeless in a dark alleyway. Shock ripples through Yuka, causing her fork to clatter to the floor as she recognizes the victim. Kawakita turns around, his voice heavy with the grim confirmation that he's already aware of the news. Yuka collapses to the floor, her mind racing with the realization that she was the last person to see the girl safe. Tears well up in her eyes as she struggles to process the senseless violence in the city. Kawakita stands by her side, offering a steady presence as she breaks down in the middle of her living room. She looks up at him with desperate eyes, asking if this was the work of another vampire. He reaches out, grounding her with a firm grip as he prepares to reveal a darker truth. They sit together in the dim light, the weight of the supernatural world pressing down on them. Kawakita explains that this wasn't just a random act, but a sign of a much larger threat. He describes an underground organization of vampires that has been hunting humans for years. He admits he's been tracking them in secret, though his hands are tied by his public identity. Yuka listens intently, her fear turning into a grim understanding of the world she's entered. He looks her dead in the eye, reminding her that she is the only person he was able to save from that night. She holds onto his arm, terrified that his intervention at the factory has put a target on his back. He gently reassures her, his touch a silent promise that he is more than capable of protecting them both. Later that night, Yuka's phone buzzes on the nightstand with an incoming call from Eri. She picks it up, sensing the urgency in her senior's late-night contact. Standing by her window, Yuka listens as Eri warns her to stay indoors after dark. She lies back on her bed, the weight of the day's revelations making it impossible to rest. Her voice trembles as she discusses the news with her mentor, seeking any bit of comfort. She mentions her brief encounter with the flower girl, the guilt still fresh in her mind. On the other end of the line, Eri is already on the scene, investigating the alley with her team. Yuka recounts the exact moment they parted ways, searching for any detail that might help. She is haunted by the image of the girl's cheerful face, wishing she had done more to protect her. Eri's expression hardens as she listens, knowing exactly how close Yuka came to danger herself. Her teammates watch her closely, curious about the civilian she is so focused on protecting. Ken rubs the back of his neck, acknowledging the bond Eri seems to have with her junior. George remains silent and analytical, considering the implications of Yuka's involvement. The men decide to step back, respecting the gravity of the conversation between the two women. However, George can't help but crack a sly grin, hinting at a plan to reach out to Yuka on his own terms. In the aftermath of the investigation, George wears a playful smirk while telling his companion to take his jokes less seriously. His partner isn't amused, reminding the silver-haired hunter that Eri would be furious if she knew he was messing with her protege. George's expression shifts to a calculating gaze as he questions whether Eri could truly maintain her professional coldness if Yuka were involved. The heavy-set hunter immediately delivers a comical blow to George's head, threatening to pummel him for even suggesting such a thing. Rubbing his bruised ego, a disgruntled George tells his teammate he needs to learn some restraint. Meanwhile, Yuka sits on her bed, her face etched with worry as she finally decides to make a difficult phone call. On the other end, Eri maintains her focus on the dark alleyway while listening to her friend's trembling voice. Yuka takes a deep breath and confesses the secret she's been harboring. She actually encountered a vampire in an alleyway a month ago. Eri's eyes widen in alarm, her professional instincts immediately kicking into high gear. In a brief flashback, Yuka remembers the mysterious figure of the president standing over her, though his identity remained hidden in the shadows. Eri is stunned that a random passerby was capable of defending Yuka against a supernatural predator. As Yuka recounts the event, she internally questions why she is still choosing to protect the president's identity from her own friend. The stress of the revelation takes its toll on Eri, who feels like her life expectancy is dropping by the second. She adopts a stern, protective tone, ordering Yuka never to keep such a dangerous secret from her again. Relieved to have come clean, Yuka raises her hand in a solemn promise to be more transparent in the future. As Eri hangs up, she looks back at her team, realizing that the vampire energy she felt on Yuka was a residual trace from that night. She steels her resolve, knowing that as a hunter, she must be far more vigilant to protect those under her care. Eri turns her attention back to George, who has been unusually quiet during the exchange. Sensing her gaze, George casually asks what's bothering the lead investigator. Eri ignores the deflection and demands to know the details of the conversation he was having with the other hunters earlier. A flash of realization crosses Eri's face as she begins to piece together a new set of clues. George maintains a sharp, piercing stare, suggesting he knows far more about the situation than he's letting on. The scene shifts back to the corporate headquarters as the workday finally draws to a close. Inside the office, Yuka is frantically searching through her desk drawers for something she's misplaced. A senior colleague, Mrs. Ito, approaches with a clipboard to ask what has her so flustered. Yuka continues her desperate search, unable to find a specific personal item. She explains with a worried look that she can't find her favorite hairpin or her backup scrunchie. Mrs. Ito offers a kind smile and some spare hair ties, trying to ease the young secretary's stress. Suddenly, the president's assistant, Kambara, looms over them and coldly orders the women to stop gossiping and return to their duties. Once he walks away, the colleague whispers to Yuka that the assistant has been hovering around their department far more than usual lately. Yuka looks away thoughtfully, wondering if the president has assigned Kambara to keep her under constant surveillance. As the sun begins to set, Yuka leaves the building, still feeling the weight of the day's mysteries on her shoulders. Nearby, other office workers can't help but notice a strikingly handsome man waiting by a luxury vehicle. George leans against the car with practiced ease, his long silver hair catching the fading light. He waves Yuka over as she approaches, greeting her with a friendly, disarming smile. Yuka stops in her tracks, surprised to see him there, and immediately asks about Ari's whereabouts. George smoothly opens the passenger door, claiming that Ari was too busy and sent him to pick her up instead. Yuka pauses, finding it strange that her friend wouldn't have sent a quick text to confirm this arrangement. George dismisses her concerns with a grin, assuring her that Ari simply forgot in the heat of the investigation. Trusting the connection to her friend, Yuka steps into the car, unaware of any ulterior motives. The vehicle pulls away from the curb, disappearing into the golden glow of the city streets. Watching from a distance, President Kawakita stands by his own car, his expression unreadable as he observes the departure. His driver notices the lingering gaze and asks if there is an issue that needs his attention. Kawakita's eyes narrow with suspicion as he commands his driver to bring his car around immediately. Later that night, the investigation leads the hunters deep into a secluded forest under the moonlight. Ari reaches down to examine a patch of disturbed earth, her fingers brushing against the cold ground. She and the veteran hunter stand over a fresh grave, realizing the syndicate has moved the evidence. The hunter strokes his chin, noting that the burial site appears to have been prepared with an unusual amount of care. Ari looks up, deducing that whoever moved the body must have had a deep personal connection to the deceased flower girl. She questions why these individuals are hiding from the hunters instead of coming forward to seek justice against the vampires. The veteran hunter shrugs, leaving the complex deductions to the more analytical members of the team. Ari remains lost in thought, trying to connect the factory battle to the stolen body and the pristine condition of the victim. She looks down at a small floral charm in her hand, convinced that these overlapping events are far too calculated to be a mere coincidence. Ari presents Yuka with a charming carrot hairpin as a friendly gift. Yuka beams, instantly captivated by the cute accessory. Suddenly, a careless passerby slams right into Yuka. To her dismay, the new hairpin is already chipped from the impact. Ari watches closely, sensing a darker conspiracy unfolding. George leads Yuka toward the neon glow of the silver bullet bar. Inside, Yuka looks around, confused about meeting Ari in a pub. George claims this is their usual spot to put her at ease. He catches the bartender's attention to place an order. George specifically requests the potent bullet special for his guests. The bartender reaches for a silver bottle, noting the squad leader has a target. He slides a shimmering, low-alcohol cocktail over to Yuka. Yuka is mesmerized by the beautiful, sparkling liquid in her glass. They clink their glasses together to start the evening. She takes a cautious first sip of the mysterious beverage. George masks his true intentions while taking a drink of his own. Yuka suddenly tilts her head back, gulping the entire drink down. George is absolutely floored by her aggressive drinking speed. Even the seasoned bartender is stunned to see someone chug the special. A rosy glow hits Yuka's cheeks as she praises the delicious taste. George maintains a polite smile while waiting for the drink's effect. He watches her intently, eager for her true nature to surface. Under the pale moonlight, the CEO's massive estate remains quiet. Inside, Kawakita's expression is tight with mounting concern. He paces the room, noting that Yuka is still not home. He stares at his phone, debating whether to reach out. Her contact information sits on the screen, ready to be called. He hesitates, unwilling to force her into overtime during a date. He turns to his laptop to investigate her current situation. Sitting at his desk, he finds it impossible to focus on work. The fear of her being tricked by another vampire consumes him. He gazes out the window, demanding a trace on her car. Kambara enters the office to deliver a verbal report in person. Kawakita immediately demands to know exactly where Yuka went. Kambara points to a map identifying the silver bullet bar. Kawakita's face hardens as he realizes the danger of that location. He recognizes the name as a territory strictly for vampire hunters. He concludes that Yuka has likely attracted the hunter's attention. Kambara asks if the CEO really intends to go there himself. He warns that entering the area might leave a traceable scent. The assistant reminds him that hunters never stop once they have a lead. Kawakita takes a decisive step forward, ignoring the risks. He turns his back on the warnings, focused only on the rescue. He refuses to let Yuka face danger while he stays hidden. To him, the regret of not acting is the greatest threat. Back at the bar, Yuka leans in with a dazed, happy smile. She jokingly asks George why he's staring so intensely at her. George gestures with his hand for her to come closer. He leans in, using the proximity to observe her vitals closely. George catches her arm as she begins to sway slightly. Yuka admits she might be feeling a bit weak from the drink. He remains baffled that the silver-laced drink caused no transformation. Yuka leans in close to the stranger, her face flushed as she playfully points out his attractive features. She stares intently into his eyes, struggling to find the right words to describe the familiar feeling he gives her. With a bright, intoxicated smile, she declares that he reminds her of a close friend. In her mind, she is practically shaking the life out of her actual boss for being such an unbearable egomaniac. She fumes over the constant late-night calls and the endless mountain of overtime he forces upon her daily. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts as Kawakita makes his cold and calculated entrance into the bar. He scans the room, his eyes narrowing as he spots his secretary socializing with a complete stranger. Yuka freezes in place, wondering if she is hallucinating her boss, just as she was in the middle of bad-mouthing him. Kawakita looms over their table, his presence immediately demanding the full attention of everyone nearby. His expression is unreadable but sharp, radiating an aura of absolute authority. He demands to know what Yuka is doing in a place like this, catching her completely off guard. Reality begins to sink in for Yuka, and she panics at the thought of her boss seeing her in this state. She remains paralyzed with her hand still on the stranger's sleeve, unable to process the sudden confrontation. Slowly, her fingers slip away from the man's coat as she tries to distance herself from the awkward situation. George grinds his teeth in frustration, annoyed that his investigation into her true nature was just interrupted. He stares Kawakita down, asking who he is and why he thinks he can just barge into their conversation. Kawakita doesn't flinch, stating with icy resolve that he is Yuka's superior. Fearing another lecture on work ethics, Yuka tries to make a quick break for the exit. She spots the crowd moving on the dance floor and decides that blending in is her best chance at escape. The tension between the two men escalates as George reminds the CEO that they are currently well beyond business hours. George crosses his arms defiantly, suggesting that the boss is overstepping his professional boundaries. Kawakita fires back, claiming his interference is necessary when his employee is drinking with a suspicious character. The insult strikes a chord, leaving George visibly irritated by the baseless accusation. Meanwhile, Yuka starts dancing awkwardly on her own, desperately trying to look like she is just another carefree patron. She hopes that by playing this part, she can avoid any further questioning from her boss. She casts a nervous glance over her shoulder to see if Kawakita is still tracking her movements. Before she can slip away, Kawakita intercepts her, his eyes locking onto hers with intense focus. He reaches out and firmly grasps her hand, preventing any further attempt at a quiet exit. He pulls her into a formal dance, deciding that joining her is the most efficient way to keep her under his direct supervision. The rest of the bar patrons continue their revelry, completely oblivious to the high-stakes tension between the trio. George turns back to the bar to pour another drink, lamenting the arrival of such a powerful rival. The dance isn't exactly graceful, as a clumsy Yuka repeatedly steps on Kawakita's expensive shoes. Watching them dance triggers a wave of melancholy in George as he stares into his glass. He is suddenly transported back to a memory of his youth, practicing a similar dance with his sister Ran. Those were simpler times filled with genuine laughter and a bond that once seemed unbreakable. But that happiness vanished the day Ran chose to leave him for a man she claimed to love. The weight of his past failures settles in, and George takes a heavy swig of wine to numb the pain of his memories. The bartender notices the shift in mood and tries to strike up a conversation with his brooding customer. George isn't in the mood for small talk and tells the man to stay out of his business. The bartender continues to poke fun, suggesting that George is moping because he lost the girl to a more handsome suitor. He leans over the counter, jokingly warning George that hesitation will only lead to more heartbreak. Ignoring the banter, George sternly asks when Ari is expected to return to the establishment. The bartender checks the time and notes that she should be back within the next 10 minutes. Realizing the danger Yuka is in if the lead hunter finds her, George snaps into action. He cuts through the dance floor and firmly tells Yuka that it is time for him to take her home. Yuka is left blinking in confusion, wondering why they are leaving so abruptly without waiting for Senior Ari. George breaks a sweat as he manufactures a lie about a late-night work call. Kawakita stands his ground, accusing George of tricking his secretary into coming here. George flashes a sharp grin, dismissing the CEO's harsh choice of words. He offers Yuka a ride, warning her against trusting the wrong people. Kawakita counters immediately, advising Yuka to avoid suspicious strangers. Yuka stands frozen as both men demand her attention. She shudders at the thought of a tense interrogation in the president's car. Choosing the lesser of two evils, she considers leaving with George instead. Yuka gently pulls away, informing the president she'll go with George. Kawakita's expression darkens as he demands a full explanation at home. Yuka realizes her living situation makes the upcoming talk even more terrifying. She offers a nervous, formal bow to thank the CEO for his hospitality. George firmly takes her hand to lead her out of the bar. The pair exits the establishment under Kawakita's watchful, icy gaze. George reels in shock after hearing they live together. The bartender mocks George for being effectively rejected. George snaps, physically silencing his friend's annoying commentary. Airi enters the bar with her partner, looking drained from the field. George settles at the counter, requesting another round of the bullet special. Airi approaches him, asking if anything suspicious occurred during her absence. The team gathers at the bar to discuss their latest findings. Airi reports finding an unidentified body during their investigation. Her partner sighs, noting how these cases are becoming increasingly bizarre. George changes the subject, asking about a specific carrot-shaped hairpin. He eyes Airi closely while she calmly sips her drink. Airi realizes George already deduced the truth behind the accessory. She confirms she gave the pin to Yuka as a gift. When her partner blurts out a loud question, Airi quickly shuts him down. George insists Yuka is safe despite the lingering vampire aura. Airi explains that Yuka is likely an undiscovered victim of an attack. She looks away, reflecting on her long-standing bond with Yuka. The atmosphere grows heavy as they discuss Yuka's safety. Airi warns George that his obsession mirrors his past trauma with his sister. She asks for the specific results of the bullet special test. George admits the drink revealed a slight, concerning reaction. Airi wonders how a vampire could possibly bypass the bar's entrance. She gestures to the magical barrier designed to nullify vampire resistance. George stands, determined to keep a close watch on Yuka's movements. He demands to know why Yuka's current status is so complicated. Airi hesitates, her boots clicking as she weighs her words. George panics upon learning Yuka resides at the CEO's house. Airi clarifies the arrangement is strictly for professional efficiency. George offers Yuka a spare room at his place to protect her. The surrounding hunters look on in stunned silence at his proposal. The bartender and partner toast to George's extreme dedication. A sudden phone call interrupts with news of a fresh attack. The night air is thick with tension as police sirens wail across a cordoned-off crime scene. Detective Fox stands at the perimeter, greeting the arriving hunters with a grim acknowledgement of their presence. Airi and George waste no time, stepping past the tape as she prepares for a professional examination of the scene. The detective delivers the bad news immediately, confirming the fatal wounds match the previous strings of attacks perfectly. Every step Airi takes toward the center of the scene feels heavier than the last. She kneels beside the victim, a businessman whose life was snuffed out just 2 hours prior. George watches her closely, his mind racing as he realizes he was distracted with Yuka when this tragedy occurred. A cold fire ignites in Airi's eyes as she silently vows that this reign of terror will end today. The investigation is suddenly interrupted by a frantic officer, reporting another double attack only kilometers away. The news hits Fox like a physical blow, his face twisting in disbelief at the killer's brazen speed. He grabs the messenger by the collar, demanding every single detail of the new development. The officer quickly clarifies that this time, there are survivors and a direct eyewitness ready to talk. The team rushes to the local hospital where the lights hum with an eerie, clinical stillness. Outside the ward, Fox gives the hunters a final briefing on how to handle the sensitive interview. He signals George to follow him, needing the hunters' keen instincts to help vet the witness's story. Airi pushes the door open with a gentle touch, her professional demeanor shifting to one of quiet compassion. She sits at the bedside of a young girl, softly asking if she's recovered enough to speak about what she saw. Despite the trauma, the brave child sits up, determined to help before her memories of the night fade. Airi offers a comforting word of encouragement before asking for a description of the person responsible. The girl's voice trembles as she describes a young woman with long, flowing curly hair. Airi's brow furrows in surprise, noting the shift in the profile from their previous suspects. A dark silhouette looms in the child's memory, a figure she describes as hauntingly beautiful. In the next room, George stares intensely at the second survivor, double-checking the validity of the claim. The man sits hunched over, his certainty unshaken by the detective's piercing gaze. He insists the attacker had a striking figure and pale skin that left no doubt about her identity. George leans in closer, searching for any minor detail that could lead them to a hideout. The witness suddenly remembers a lingering scent from the struggle, the distinct fragrance of Lily of the Valley. Fox immediately takes charge, ordering a composite sketch to be drafted with these specific traits in mind. When the drawing is finally revealed, Airi stares at the paper in absolute shock, recognizing the face looking back at her. Meanwhile, a heavy silence fills the car as Kawakita drives Yuka back through the dark streets. Yuka is a nervous wreck, frantically trying to come up with a professional excuse for her state of intoxication. She steals a glance at the president, puzzled by his uncharacteristic lack of interrogation. She clutches her coat tight, feeling as though she's hiding a secret she can't quite name. Internally, she tries to rationalize her right to a personal life, even if her boss is acting strange. Kawakita remains focused on the road, his expression a mask of cold, professional detachment. Yuka can't shake the feeling that something about the president is fundamentally different tonight. They pull up to the estate, and he curtly instructs her to head inside while he attends to urgent business. She stands by the gate, watching the luxury vehicle with a sense of growing unease. Kawakita steps out to meet a mysterious contact, his movements sharp and calculated in the moonlight. Yuka finally retreats into the house, her mind spinning with the oddities of the evening. High above in the trees, a pair of bats watch the scene, mocking the president for using a shayaseki to hide his nature. Yuka pauses in the hallway, the strange word echoing in her mind as she tries to understand its meaning. The creatures explain that while the shayaseki hides a vampire's aura from hunters, it inflicts agonizing pain on the user. Yuka is horrified, wondering why he would endure such torture just to accompany her to a bar. Kawakita appears in the doorway, his silhouette casting a long, intimidating shadow across the room. He shuts down her questions with a sharp command, a dark, crackling energy manifesting around his hand. The bats scatter into the night, terrified by the sudden surge of the president's suppressed power. Yuka reaches out, her eyes wide as she realizes the sheer scale of the danger he's been navigating. Kawakita's gaze turns toward the horizon, warning her that a storm is coming that will tear the city apart. Yuka walks briskly outside the office, reassuring her contact over the phone that her ride home with the president last night was strictly professional. She steps into the elevator, promising her senior colleague that she will remain vigilant despite the calm morning. Glancing down at her phone, Yuka can't help but wonder if the president's ominous warning about a coming storm is actually starting to manifest. The office atmosphere is thick with dread as employees huddle together, whispering about the horrific news reports from the previous night. One woman boasts that her boyfriend's daily protection is her only sense of security in these dangerous times. The conversation takes a dark turn as another staff member warns that any encounter with a vampire is a guaranteed death sentence. Yuka moves toward her desk with a heavy heart, the weight of the city's fear pressing down on her shoulders. She sets her signature perfume on the desk, the bottle a small reminder of her usual routine amidst the growing chaos. A friendly colleague approaches, noting that Yuka's early arrival might help her avoid a confrontation with the hostile Mr. Kambara. The mere mention of the man's name causes Yuka to break into a cold sweat, fearing his relentless scrutiny. Her coworker scoffs, venting that Kambara is only interested in his own promotion and lacks any real empathy for the staff. Sensing Yuka's stress, the woman leans in to share a supposedly helpful tip she found online. She displays a digital storefront on her phone, packed with high-priced holy water and lucky charms meant to ward off evil. Yuka looks on in confusion as her friend explains she finally gained access to this exclusive, members-only shop. The colleague explains that after yesterday's news, the public has descended into a panic, buying up these protective items at a frantic pace. Yuka stares at the screen with a growing sense of unease, feeling an eerie familiarity with the items being sold. She bluntly tells her friend that these charms are useless, having personally witnessed how ineffective they are against real vampires. Her coworker is left speechless, stunned that Yuka can remain so composed after everything that has happened. Suddenly, a high-priority notification pings on the colleague's phone, signaling the arrival of a viral video. The two women lean in close to watch the footage, which was allegedly captured by a brave witness during last night's incident. The grainy video reveals a hooded figure standing over a victim, sending a chill down the spine of anyone watching. The colleague points out the shocking resemblance between the suspect and the woman standing right next to her. Yuka's heart stops as she realizes the face on the screen isn't just a lookalike, it is undeniably her own. The comment section below the video is already exploding with users claiming the face looks hauntingly familiar. Fear turns to targeted anger as one commenter explicitly identifies the suspect as an employee of SOBT. Across town at the Silver Bullet Bar, the tension is just as palpable among the hunters. George stares at his phone in disbelief, recognizing the face in the sketch that Ari has been so focused on. The image of the hooded woman from the video is frozen on the screen, a perfect match for the girl they know. George shows the footage to the bartender, who confirms the girl in the video was present at the bar just yesterday. Ari and George watch as the video gains more traction, realizing the window to act is closing fast. Ari notes with a grim expression that the public is attacking Yuka's reputation with calculated hostility. The bartender is baffled, wondering why anyone would choose to target an innocent recent graduate like Yuka. Ari's gaze sharpens as she realizes this isn't a random attack, but a deliberate attempt to destroy a life. George scrolls further, alarmed that the internet is now linking Yuka to the previous flower-selling girl incident. Ari concludes that this frame-up has been in motion for a long time, with Yuka as the ultimate scapegoat. The realization that Yuka was the intended target from the very beginning leaves George visibly shaken. Ari remains analytical, suspecting there is a deeper, more sinister objective they have yet to uncover. George suggests they reach out immediately, fearing must be in a total state of shock. Ari looks down at her device, deciding that a phone call won't be enough to stop the storm that has already arrived. Back at the office, the heavy tread of boots signals the arrival of the authorities. George watches the digital feed with intense focus, monitoring the escalation in real time. Yuka handles a frantic call, her voice trembling as she tries to make sense of the nightmare. She informs her contact that she can't stay on the line, as the police are already closing in on her desk. A detective and a uniformed officer stand before Yuka, prepared to take her into custody in front of her peers. Kawakita suddenly steps forward, placing himself between Yuka and the officers with a protective stance. With a cold, commanding stare, the president informs the detective that if Yuka is going anywhere, he will be right by her side. Crowds gather in the street, eyes glued to a viral livestream announcing a breaking report from SWT headquarters. The man behind the lens, a streamer named Ryuma, arrives on the scene with his professional gear in tow. He wastes no time, firmly planting his tripod to ensure he captures every second of the unfolding chaos. Ryuma checks his phone with a predatory grin, determined to broadcast Yuka's arrest to the entire world. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at the local police station is thick with tension as the investigation reaches a boiling point. Inside, Eri stays glued to her phone, coordinating their next move with urgent precision. On the other end of the line, Ken navigates through traffic, his eyes fixed on the road as he prepares to intervene. Eri listens intently, her expression hardening as she realizes the scale of the media circus forming outside. Ken senses the shift in her voice, asking for an immediate update on the situation at the headquarters. Eri explains that Ryuma's live broadcast is already drawing a massive audience, further framing Yuka in the public eye. Ken grips the steering wheel tighter, his resolve hardening as he speeds toward the scene to uncover the truth. Eri scrutinizes the live stream on her device, noticing a subtle detail in the background that feels completely out of place. The camera pans over a quiet garden area near the corporate building, seemingly far from the main commotion. A man in a suit paces nervously through the greenery, his darting eyes suggesting he has something to hide. A flash of color catches the light as a braided purple bracelet hangs precariously from his pocket. He quickly retreats toward the shadows, hoping to slip away before anyone notices his presence. Suddenly, tires screech against the pavement as Ken arrives at the perfect vantage point to cut him off. Ken steps out of the vehicle and reports back to Eri, confirming that he has the target in his sights. He moves with silent efficiency, closing the distance between himself and the suspicious employee. The man remains oblivious, frantically arguing with someone over the phone about a deal gone wrong. From his hiding spot, Ken observes the man's erratic behavior, convinced that this is the lead they've been looking for. Despite the unpleasant surroundings of the alleyway, Ken remains crouched low, focused entirely on the mission for Yuka's sake. The man shouts into his receiver, his panic rising as he realizes his accomplices are abandoning him. Ken's gaze sharpens as he prepares to strike before the suspect can vanish into the city streets. He reaches for a heavy sack, ready to execute a swift and silent capture. Still focused on his call, the man complains about the risks he's taken, unaware that his luck is about to run out. He stares down at his screen in disbelief, his world crumbling as the person on the other end hangs up. Before he can react, Ken drops the sack over his head, completely blinding the panicked suspect. With a powerful strike, Ken knocks the man to the ground, neutralizing any chance of escape. Ken keeps up the pressure, demanding answers about the man's connection to the workplace conspiracy. The suspect grovels on the pavement, desperately claiming he had no hand in the recent events. Ken stands over him with an intimidating presence, refusing to believe the man's weak excuses. From beneath the sack, the man points an accusing finger, trying to shift the blame onto Yuka to save himself. Ken crosses his arms in disgust, clearly unimpressed by the man's attempts to disparage his colleague. The captured employee trembles, his muffled voice begging for a reward in exchange for his cooperation. Ken decides the interrogation is over for now, delivering a decisive blow to put the man to sleep. He stands over the unconscious figure, satisfied that the immediate threat has been handled. Reaching down, Ken retrieves the suspicious purple bracelet that the man was carrying. He holds the evidence up and snaps a clear photo, instantly transmitting the discovery to Eri for analysis. Back at the office, Eri receives the update and warns Ken to keep his cool while she begins her next move. Inside the SWT building, officers confront Kawakita, insisting that he step aside so they can perform their duties. An older official looks on with a stern, impatient expression, waiting for the CEO to comply. Kawakita stands his ground with unwavering authority, making it clear that he will not let his staff be taken without a fight. He places himself directly in front of Yuka, serving as a human shield against the looming threat of the law. Yuka looks up at him with wide, shimmering eyes, overwhelmed by the president's sudden and fierce protection. Kawakita meets her gaze with a reassuring look, promising her that she isn't alone in this crisis. Across town, Eri arrives at a secure location, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she enters. She examines the evidence sent by Ken, her mind racing to connect the bracelet to the masterminds of the frame-up. She holds the braided accessory up to the light, realizing this small object might be the key to clearing Yuka's name. Kawakita stands his ground, firmly reminding the inspector that this is a place of business, not a consultation room. The inspector gazes back with a skeptical look, clearly unimpressed by the CEO's defiance. Suddenly, the inspector's pocket begins to buzz as a call interrupts the tense standoff. He pulls out his phone, acknowledging that Kawakita has already moved to pull some strings behind the scenes. A look of irritation crosses his face the moment he realizes his own chief is on the other end of the line. The chief's voice thunders through the speaker, berating the inspector for causing a scene at a high-profile company like SWT. Realizing he's been outmaneuvered, the inspector orders his team to retreat as he's commanded back to the station. With the immediate threat of arrest gone, Kawakita looks down at Yuka, finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. Yuka clutches her chest, her voice trembling as she apologizes for the chaos she's brought upon the company. Kawakita's expression remains stoic as he tells her to simply go home, and stay out of sight if she's truly feeling guilty. Terrified by his cold demeanor, a panicked Yuka wonders if he's still fuming over her secret trip to the bar. An awkward, heavy silence fills the corridor as the two stand in the aftermath of the police raid. The inspector suddenly knocks on the doorframe to grab their attention one last time. He grudgingly announces that he's backing off for now, but strictly forbids them from leaving the city limits. With a sharp gesture, he leads his officers out of the building, ending the public spectacle. As they leave, Kawakita stares into the distance, plagued by a strange, nagging unease in his chest. He watches Yuka's retreating figure, questioning why he feels such a strong urge to protect someone he shouldn't care about. Eri steps into the room, calmly approaching the departing inspector. The inspector is surprised to see her, but she simply explains that she's there to check on her junior. The inspector blinks in confusion, not understanding the connection between the high-ranking hunter and the secretary. Eri smiles, clarifying that she adores Yuka like a little sister and tells the officer to move along. The inspector mumbles to himself, realizing Yuka has far more powerful allies than he initially thought. Her co-workers whisper among themselves, shocked that the quiet secretary is apparently such a big shot. Yuka clenches her fists, insisting that she doesn't want special treatment, she only wants to prove her innocence. The inspector and his remaining men finally disappear down the hall, leaving the office in peace. Eri's sharp eyes spot something in Yuka's hand and she asks about the pink braided bracelet. Yuka explains that it was a gift from her co-worker, Mrs. Imada, unaware of its true significance. Eri's expression turns serious as she touches her chin, mentally connecting the dots to the crime scene. Yuka then pulls a bottle of perfume from her bag, mentioning she received this from the same person. Eri realizes the evidence is mounting and asks Yuka if anyone else at work has been acting suspicious. Yuka thinks back and mentions a male coworker who is constantly glaring and picking on her. Eri leans in with intense focus, demanding a full description of this mysterious man in the suit. Sensing the shift in tone, Yuka asks if there's something wrong with the items she was given. Eri quickly brushes off the concern, mentioning that Ken is waiting for them downstairs. As they walk, Eri tightly grips the pink bracelet, knowing it's the key to cracking the conspiracy. Out of nowhere, a hand reaches out and firmly grabs Yuka by the shoulder. It's Ken, leaning in with a smirk and asking Yuka if she happened to miss him. Caught completely off guard, Yuka lets out a startled shriek and nearly jumps out of her skin. Kawakita is there in an instant to steady her, telling her to watch her step. Yuka hides behind the CEO, shouting at Ken for sneaking up on her like a ghost. Ken raises his hands defensively, reminding her that he just risked everything to help her out. Before he can say another word, Eri delivers a sharp kick to his shin to shut him up. Kawakita adjusts his tie, clearly annoyed that his private office has become a revolving door for outsiders. Ken crosses his arms, boldly stating that his only reason for being there is Yuka's safety. Eri turns her attention to Kawakita, addressing him as both Yuka's boss and her landlord. Kawakita freezes, his eyes narrowing as he repeats the word landlord with visible suspicion. Eri continues, noting that Yuka is always praising how much he helps her out at his home. She then clarifies that while they aren't police, they provide expert opinions on difficult cases. Kawakita's gaze turns icy as he demands that they stay out of this investigation entirely. Yuka watches the exchange, sensing that Kawakita's tone has become unusually sharp and curt. She stares at him in silence, wondering what could have caused his mood to sour so quickly. Eri and Ken stand before Kawakita, ready to take their leave after a tense exchange. Eri stares him down, wondering if he stayed behind just to deliver a cryptic warning. She warns the CEO that Yuka is already worried enough without him overextending himself. With a sharp smirk, she asks if a man like him would really abandon someone important just because things got dangerous. Kawakita's gaze remains unreadable, his eyes narrowing as he processes her challenge. Eri turns her back, claiming she and the CEO actually share the same protective sentiment. Kawakita watches them go, his expression shifting into a mask of cold calculation. As the hunters walk away, he admits to his assistant that they don't realize how lethal this investigation truly is. He expresses a deep-seated desire to keep Yuka far away from anyone associated with the Silver Bullet organization. His assistant notes that the hunters have been struggling to rebuild their numbers since the last major conflict. Kawakita looks away, hoping the recent connections are nothing more than a series of unfortunate coincidences. The sound of rhythmic footsteps echoes as Eri and Ken make their way down the sidewalk. Ken breaks the silence, asking Eri if she thinks the CEO is hiding deeper secrets about the supernatural. Eri doubts it, believing top-secret vampire intel is well beyond the reach of a mere corporate president. She playfully nudges Ken, figuring Kawakita is just another person caught up in Yuka's orbit. Ken remains skeptical, touching his chin as he questions if the CEO's concern is strictly professional. Eri shrugs it off, glad that Yuka at least has people looking out for her welfare. Ken turns the tables, pointing out that Eri herself seems unusually restless and impatient regarding this case. She looks down, admitting that the thought of Yuka being in real danger genuinely unnerves her. They stop in their tracks as Ken suggests that Yuka might be more capable than they give her credit for. He offers a knowing smile, wondering if she's really just a girl who needs constant protection. Meanwhile, the afternoon sun glints off the glass facade of the corporate headquarters. Inside, office workers lean in close, whispering rumors about why Mrs. Ito was spared from police questioning. A senior staff member sharply cuts through the gossip, demanding everyone return to their professional duties immediately. Left alone with her thoughts, she can only hope that everyone stays safe amidst the rising tension. Yuka sits at her desk, feeling strangely empty now that her workload has been drastically reduced. A hand suddenly rests on her desk, snapping her out of her deep state of contemplation. Kawakita towers over her, sternly reminding her to focus on the tasks she has left. Yuka realizes with a sweat drop that she's actually become accustomed to being overworked by him. The heavy sound of a door opening draws her attention away from her computer screen. Mr. Kambara stumbles into the room, looking disheveled and clearly frustrated. Yuka rushes over, horrified to see the dark bruises and scratches marking his face. He looks at her with suspicion, his eyes searching for any sign of guilt behind her concern. He bluntly asks if she was the one behind the sudden attack, leaving her completely baffled. He quickly backs down, admitting she isn't the type of person who could pull off an assault. He knocks on the CEO's door, announcing he has an urgent report to deliver. As he enters, he grumbles about being jumped by a random thug just outside the building. Yuka stands alone, her hands clasped as she worries about the safety of those around her. Suddenly, a realization hits her, and she begins to question the true nature of Kambara's encounter. Her investigation leads her to the local animal welfare center, a quiet spot away from the city bustle. She narrows her eyes, determined to find a connection between this place and the recent incidents. Yuka walks cautiously through the deserted area, knowing how vulnerable she is in such an isolated location. She accidentally collides with a young man who is distracted by his phone, causing him to snap in annoyance. She confronts his rudeness, refusing to be intimidated by his sudden outburst. The boy glares at her with a smirk, implying things would be easier if she had just stayed at the police station. Their argument escalates into a petty back and forth as they square off in the middle of the street. The young man grinds his teeth, clearly losing his patience with her defiance. Yuka catches a glimpse of something in his eyes that tells her this meeting was no accident. He roughly directs her toward a nearby building, telling her to quiet down as they move. The young man remains flustered as Yuka stays close, his face turning a deep shade of red. He quickly pushes her back, sternly warning her that he won't fall for any of her supposed charms. Yuka immediately silences him by clamping her hand over his mouth, sensing someone nearby. They both peer cautiously around the corner to see what is happening in the hallway. A suspicious man in a blue hoodie and sunglasses stands outside, focused on a private phone call. He is soon joined by an associate in a gray suit, and the two exchange a quick, low-toned conversation. Yuka and her companion watch the duo intently, realizing they've stumbled onto something significant. Staying low to the ground, Yuka moves with careful precision to avoid being detected. She leans out from her hiding spot, her eyes locked on the suspicious pair. The youth follows her closely, whispering a question about what she has discovered. Yuka ducks behind the greenery, her heart racing as she maintains her surveillance. Through a nearby window, the grim sight of a man collapsed face down on a couch is revealed. Horror washes over Yuka's face as she realizes the gravity of the situation. She watches the two men outside through the glass, trapped between the mystery indoors and the threat outdoors. One of the men turns, his sharp features and thin mustache giving him a villainous air. Fearing she has been seen, Yuka quickly retreats into the shadows, covering her mouth to stay silent. Her mind races with confusion, recognizing the man who was supposedly dead at the factory. The youth points an accusatory finger at Yuka, suspecting she is deeper into this mess than she claims. Yuka shoots him an annoyed look, demanding to know why he is still following her every move. He defends himself, explaining that he was already here conducting his own investigation. Despite the danger, the two continue to bicker as he tells her to leave the site immediately. Yuka pulls out her phone, showing she isn't afraid to take control of the situation. She threatens to call for backup, leaving the hot-headed youth fuming in frustration. Turning back to the mission, she informs him that new evidence has fundamentally changed the case. Without waiting for an answer, she marches off to trail the suspects, leaving him sitting in the dirt. The young man stares after her, his eyes burning with a newfound sense of determination. He adjusts his communication earpiece, ready to jump back into the thick of the action. Yuka keeps a safe distance as she follows the suspects toward a distant lighthouse by the coast. The two men walk briskly through the open field, completely unaware they are being tailed. Hiding behind the thick trunk of a tree, Yuka keeps her eyes glued to the man in the gray shirt. The youth maintains his own vantage point, looking focused as the stakes continue to rise. The trail leads them to a bustling shipping yard, filled with massive cargo containers. One of the men begins inspecting a stack of red containers, checking the specialized yellow seals. His partner approaches him, and they begin discussing the logistics of their operation. They exchange a small purple trinket, agreeing that this will be their final high-stakes deal. The mustached man lets out a dark chuckle, planning to pin their next crime on Yuka once again. They revel in their scheme, confident that the public's fear will do the rest of their work for them. He crushes the purple object in his hand, fueled by a deep-seated desire for vengeance. Overhearing their plot, Yuka freezes in place, her eyes wide with shock. She realizes with a jolt that she is the primary target of their sinister plan. Suddenly, a mysterious figure cloaked in black appears behind the two criminals. The hooded man chides them for their loose lips, warning them that someone is listening. The two men spin around in a panic as their secret meeting is compromised. The hooded stranger raises his hand, coldly stating that he will deal with the intruder himself. Yuka gasps in terror, realizing that her presence has finally been discovered. She scans the cramped room she has entered, desperately searching for a place to disappear. She dives toward the floor, tucking herself into a tiny gap beside a nightstand. Her breath hitches as the sound of footsteps draws closer and closer to her hiding spot. A man in a sharp suit looms over her, his presence casting a long, dark shadow. A hand reaches out to seize her, leaving Yuka praying for the president to arrive in time. Yuka's eyes widen as she realizes she isn't alone in the shadows. Valenta quickly moves in, pressing a hand over her mouth to ensure their presence remains a secret. In her mind, she's overwhelmed with relief that her protector finally arrived when she needed him most. Heavy footsteps echo nearby as an unknown pursuer searches the area for any sign of movement. She trembles in his arms, terrified that the slightest sound will give their position away. Valent holds her firmly against him, using a heavy cloth to shield them from prying eyes. Outside their hiding spot, a hooded figure scans the interior of a nearby shipping container. The young investigator nearby is caught off guard by the sudden turn of events. With a sinister grin, the hooded pursuer believes he has finally cornered his prey. A desperate shout rings out across the yard as someone is seized by the hostile forces. Yuka watches the commotion from the safety of the shadows, her breath hitching in her throat. Valent explains that he's using a specialized stone to mask their energy from the hunter's detection. Now that the immediate danger has passed, Yuka finally finds the strength to steady her breathing. Valent maintains a stoic and professional gaze as he monitors the perimeter. Realizing she's still clutching his lapels, Yuka awkwardly begins to pull away. She stammers an apology, her face flushing with embarrassment over her frantic reaction. In her haste to step back, her heel catches on the fabric of the sheet covering the floor. Gravity takes over as she loses her balance, tumbling backward with a startled cry. Valenta reacts instantly, leaning over to ensure she hasn't injured herself during the fall. They find themselves in a tense, silent moment as the dust settles around them. Flustered, Yuka softly asks him to step back so she can regain her footing. He offers a brief apology and immediately creates professional distance between them. Yuka tries to calm her racing heart, the adrenaline from the encounter still surging through her. Valenta stands ready, his focus entirely on the tactical mission at hand. He informs her that they must evacuate the shipping yard before more reinforcements arrive. She stays close to his side as they navigate through the maze of steel containers. Yuka pauses in confusion when he suddenly turns toward her again. Without a word, he prepares to assist her in moving through the difficult terrain. He lifts her up efficiently, noting that their current walking pace is far too slow for an escape. Valenta commands her to hold on tight as he prepares to bypass the obstacles ahead. She leans into his shoulder, finding an unexpected sense of peace in the middle of a crisis. With a powerful burst of speed, he leaps over the high fences surrounding the facility. She can't help but wonder why she feels so secure in the arms of someone she should technically fear. They soar through the night air, leaving the dangerous conspiracy at the docks behind them. Elsewhere in the city, the clock strikes a late hour at a mysterious shop known for granting requests. Suspicious individuals are seen moving heavy crates under the cover of darkness. A silver-haired observer watches from the shadows, confirming that this establishment is definitely involved in illegal activity. He tracks the movement of the transport vehicles, noting their intended destination. Carefully, he documents the evidence he finds within the abandoned warehouse. Opening a large chest, he discovers a massive stash of golden talismans hidden inside. Back at the safe house, Yuka sits in quiet contemplation, processing everything she witnessed. Valenta notices her getting up and asks where she intends to go so late. She explains that she needs to relay this critical information to Sister Aileen immediately. He stops her, insisting that any important discussions should take place in a secure environment. She looks at him with determination, asking if she has permission to bring her allies to this location. Later, a steaming cup of tea is served as the atmosphere in the room remains heavy with tension. The silver-haired investigator joins the group, greeting Valenta with a smirk as they prepare to expose the truth. Valenta sets a cold boundary, making it clear that while he's rescued Yuka, he has no patience for dogs in his presence. Grantham recoils in shock, pointing an accusing finger at the CEO's blatant lack of manners. Unfazed, Valenta crosses his arms and maintains his icy, professional composure. The tension de-escalates into a petty squabble as the two men bicker like children. Yuka can only press a hand to her forehead, exhausted by the sudden drop in maturity from her protectors. Shifting back to the mission, Aileen leans in to review the notes, certain that these events are far from random. A memory flashes back to Yuka standing before the mysterious shop known for granting requests. Sensing her hesitation, Valent asks if there is a problem with the timeline they are establishing. Yuka frantically waves her hands to dismiss his suspicion, desperate to hide her past mistakes. Internally, she knows she can never reveal that she once sought out tools specifically to deal with Valent. Aileen continues the briefing, recounting how Yuka was lured into a trap and kidnapped after visiting the shop owner. In the depths of that past terror, Yuka had cursed Valent's name for the mess she was in. The investigation reveals a grim image of the shop owner meeting a violent end at the hands of a vampire. The trail leads back to the port, where suspicious figures were caught in a hushed, clandestine meeting. Grantham confirms that the market's specialized gear was being funneled through that very shop under the cover of night. Yuka meticulously records every detail, connecting the dots of the smuggling operation in her notebook. Aileen deduces that the masterminds are playing a double game for both profit and personal vendettas. Yuka is left confused, wondering why someone would seek revenge when the owner was already dead. Grantham pores over the evidence, muttering about the inherent deviousness of the vampire kind. He suddenly stops, feeling Valent's piercing gaze burning into the side of his head. Valent's expression darkens at the insult, his eyes narrowing with quiet fury. Eileen rubs her temples, feeling the weight of the investigation's lack of progress. She places a steadying hand on Grantham's shoulder, urging him to keep his personal biases out of the professional analysis. Grantham stares intensely at the evidence, convinced a specific vampire is the root cause of the chaos. The photograph reveals a shadowy, hooded figure lurking in the periphery of the crime scene. Yuka looks on in concern, trying to understand why she would be a target for such a powerful entity. Her hand tenses against her knee as the gravity of the situation sinks in. She stands up and firmly requests that the investigation stop here for the safety of her friends. Grantham looks up at her in disbelief, stunned by her sudden decision to back down. Eileen doesn't hesitate to kick the investigator into gear, forcing him to respect Yuka's wishes. She takes Yuka's hands in hers, offering a moment of genuine comfort and support. The duo prepares to head out, promising to let Yuka get some much-needed rest after her ordeal. Their car speeds away from the safe house, disappearing into the dark forest road. Inside the vehicle, Eileen and Grantham drop the act, discussing the vampire they've tracked to the abandoned factory. Eileen explains that they are shielding Yuka from the danger to spare her any more trauma. Grantham's gaze hardens as he agrees to handle the threat in the shadows where it belongs. The headlights cut through the night as the hunters set out on their secret mission. Back inside, Yuka discards a scrap of evidence, trying to put the nightmare behind her. Her face remains clouded with worry, the piece of the room feeling fragile. Valent watches her closely, his sharp eyes missing nothing of her internal struggle. He offers her a glass of water with a solemn vow that he will resolve the situation personally. Yuka accepts the glass, offering a soft word of thanks to the man protecting her. She takes a slow, careful sip, trying to steady her nerves. Suddenly, a realization hits her like a bolt of lightning. She completely forgot about her other ally. Elsewhere in the city, a cold wind blows past a desolate, high-rise building. A menacing figure in a black cloak lifts a bound captive off the ground by his neck. The young hunter struggles against his ropes, shouting for his captor to release him immediately. The assailant looks down with a chilling, detached expression. He mocks the boy's helplessness, wondering how a tied-up prisoner plans to expose his secrets to the world. In the quiet of the office, Valent gives a firm nod, confirming his dangerous decision to his assistant. Scott warns that if they proceed, the enemy Jeffrey will finally lock onto their location, rendering their years of hiding completely useless. Unfazed by the risk, Valent stares ahead with cold determination, ready for the inevitable showdown. He adjusts his collar with a steady hand, accepting that this confrontation was always going to happen sooner or later. Scott looks on in disbelief, questioning if his master is truly willing to risk everything just for a single human. Valent clarifies his motive with a sharp gaze, explaining that the person he protects is a vital descendant of humanity. He tightens his grip and prepares to move, his mind set on the mission ahead. Checking his device, Scott reports that a rogue vampire has been apprehended and asks if they should mobilize immediately. Without wasting a second, Valent leads the way out of the room, his focus entirely on the looming threat. Hidden behind the door, Eve trembles as she overhears the shocking truth about Valent's hidden life. She stands frozen in the hallway, struggling to process the idea of a powerful vampire acting as a guardian for humans. The scene shifts to the director's office, where the legal investigation into the smuggling ring is officially underway. Inside, the authorities move swiftly to secure the suspects and gather evidence from Jeffrey's captured underlings. Valent sits down for a tense briefing, confirming that these men are indeed the ones working for his rival. Scott presents the latest intelligence, revealing that a vampire named Dean has been orchestrating the chaos from the shadows. The digital display shows the mysterious cloaked figure who manipulated scammers into spreading mass panic across the city. The director listens with a grim expression, trying to piece together the ultimate goal of Jeffrey's faction. Valent leans back in his chair, calmly stating that he is the primary target they've been hunting for years. He warns the director that because of their obsession with him, they will never stop pursuing Eve as well. Resting his hand on the table, Valent reminds the official that their long-standing secret cooperation is now under threat. The director rubs his forehead in stress, noting that Eileen is currently en route with critical evidence of the gang's illegal sales. He stands up to emphasize the gravity of the situation, warning Valent to keep his secrets tightly guarded. Valent's eyes widen in sudden alarm as he realizes that Eileen's arrival contradicts his earlier plans. The director is caught off guard by Valent's intense reaction, wondering what could possibly be wrong. We flash back to hours earlier, where Valent was seen carrying a simple brown bag. He walked through the villa with a rare sense of calm, intending to check on his guest. Eve greeted him with a sleepy yawn, seemingly content to stay tucked away from the world. Valent handed over the supplies and gave a strict order that she was not to leave the safety of the villa under any circumstances. Eve smiled innocently, assuring him that she would simply have Eileen come over to keep her company. A delicate hand holds a small, high-tech device, hinting at a plan already in motion. Back in the present, Eileen and Grantham arrive at the bustling station, surprised by the unusual level of activity. Valent's gaze turns sharp as a sinking feeling of betrayal begins to take hold. He confronts Eileen directly, only to learn that Eve never actually contacted her this morning. Realizing he's been tricked, Valent bolts for the exit, shouting for Scott to prepare for an emergency. Aileen and the director watch him disappear, completely baffled by his sudden, frantic departure. Grantham's eyes nearly pop out of his head as he checks a notification on his phone. He stares at the screen in horror, seeing a live broadcast titled Port Escape, promising to expose the serial case. Panic surges through him as he realizes that Eve is the one front and center in the viral video. He frantically shows the footage to Aileen, who can hardly believe what she's seeing. The two allies fume with rage, cursing Valent for failing to keep a proper eye on the headstrong girl. On the screen, Eve stands over the bound young hunter, holding a professional tool as the audience watches in suspense. The camera zooms in on the captive ally, who looks battered but remains focused on the technical mission. Eve addresses the viewers directly, urging them to prepare for a truth that will shake the city to its core. An officer bursts into the room with his phone raised, announcing that the entire internet is currently exploding over the stream. The director clenches his fist in fury, demanding that his team pinpoint the exact location of the broadcast immediately. Aileen realizes with a start that Eve used her name as a clever smokescreen to deceive Valentine. Grantham and Aileen sprint toward the exit, determined to reach the port before the situation turns fatal. They race against time, their expressions grim as they realize the sheer scale of the danger Eve has walked into. The camera pans to a desolate, skeletal building overlooking the water, the site of the secret broadcast. The young hunter casually adjusts his headband, revealing that his professional recording equipment was hidden in plain sight. Eve stares at him in shock, finding it hard to believe that someone could actually conceal a high-definition camera in a simple piece of headwear. The young hunter flashes a cocky grin, taking the insult as a badge of honor. Eve isn't in the mood for jokes, urging him to focus on their desperate escape plan instead. Stealing her nerves, Eve turns to the camera to reveal the truth of her kidnapping to the world. The cameraman hesitates, surprised she'd even bother saving someone who treated her so poorly. Eve shuts him down instantly, demanding absolute silence as they navigate the shadows. He protests, arguing that a silent livestream won't help clarify the brewing conspiracy. Suddenly, Eve freezes and signals for him to stop as she senses a shift in the air. Her gaze sharpens, feeling an unsettling stillness that suggests a trap is being set. Peering through the glass, they find the industrial docks eerily devoid of any guards. Eve realizes that the lack of resistance is the most dangerous sign of all. She takes a decisive step forward, her heel clicking against the cold metal floor. Bolting toward the exit, she concludes that something far more significant must be distracting their captors. Deep within the shipping yard, a tense standoff unfolds between Valenti and a mysterious group. A hooded figure smirks at Valent's arrival, having anticipated this confrontation all along. Valent's expression remains icy as he calls out Jeffrey's cowardly and despicable tactics. The hooded man mocks the idea of vampires hiding behind human facades and games. Casting his cloak aside, he reveals a sharp suit and claims his master works for the greater good of their kind. Valent watches from atop a container, dismissing the man's loyalty as nothing more than a death sentence. The henchman demands to know the secret connection between Valent and the elusive Duke. Valent coldly informs him that a dead man has no use for such forbidden knowledge. With a predatory grin, the enemy prepares to settle the score once and for all. One explosive step shatters the ground as the combatants launch into action. The two supernatural forces collide in midair, trailing streaks of raw energy behind them. Below the main event, a chaotic brawl erupts between the rival factions' subordinates. Valenta locks hands with his opponent, unleashing a surge of overwhelming power that illuminates the yard. Fear finally flickers in the henchman's eyes as he realizes the true extent of Valenta's strength. Nearby, Aileen and Grantham sprint through the dense foliage, hoping they aren't too late to intervene. They move with professional precision, pushing their physical limits to reach the port. Aileen's boots hit the soft earth as she maintains a relentless pace toward the disturbance. Grantham warns her that the energy he senses belongs to a vampire of terrifying rank. Aileen acknowledges the threat, knowing that such a powerful entity could easily mask its presence. The duo accelerates, fully aware of the massive danger a rogue vampire poses to the city. They burst into the shipping area, weaving through the labyrinth of massive steel containers. Grantham suddenly shouts a frantic warning to his partner. A massive shipping crate hurtles through the air, nearly crushing Aileen in its path. Coughing through the thick clouds of dust, the investigators struggle to regain their bearings. They stare in disbelief at the sheer destruction caused by the impact of the thrown cargo. Their eyes widen as they find themselves face to face with Valent amidst the wreckage. Valent looks down at them, his eyes glowing with the remnants of his transformation. He strides through the debris, leaving his defeated opponent broken in his wake. Ignoring their shock, Valent commands them to prioritize finding Eve immediately. Grantham refuses to stand down, viewing Valent as a threat that cannot be allowed to exist. With a casual flick of his wrist, Valent dispels the tension with a wave of purple energy. The force of the blast sends Grantham sliding backward across the asphalt. Driven by duty, the investigator draws his weapon and vows to end the vampire's life. Aileen intervenes at the last second, firmly grabbing Grantham's arm to prevent a fatal mistake. She locks eyes with Valente, making a tactical decision to trust him for the moment. Valente gives a short, professional nod of acknowledgement as he turns back to the battle. Aileen takes a deep, steadying breath to refocus her mind on the mission. She orders a retreat, insisting they locate Eve and the cameraman before the situation worsens. persons. Grantham tries to argue the logic, but Aileen's command is final and absolute. Her instincts tell her that the immediate threat isn't the vampire standing before them. Tightening her grip on her sidearm, she confirms that Valent is a necessary ally for now, declaring that Eve's safety is their only priority. She leads the way toward the heart of the port. Eve and her cameramen stand in the shadows of the warehouse, scouting their surroundings with caution. High above on a shipping container, two scouts observe the duo through binoculars, tracking their every move. The lead goon commands his partner to capture Eve alive while showing no mercy to the men with her. He growls about the trouble Eve has caused their organization, plotting to torment her before turning her over to his boss. With a sinister grin, he gives the final order to move out and initiate the ambush. Unaware of the overhead threat, Eve and the hunter navigate the industrial corridor, staying close to the walls. Eve peers through a narrow gap in the structure, her eyes sharp as she looks for any signs of a trap. The blonde pursuer sneers from his vantage point, convinced that cornering the pair inside will lead to an easy capture. The two assailants move into position on the ground, deciding to flank the building from the rear entrance. They step into the dimly lit facility with confidence, completely unaware that they are walking into a setup. Suddenly, the lead goon's boot hits a slick patch of yellow liquid leaking from a nearby barrel. Both men lose their footing instantly, tumbling onto the greasy floor in a disorganized heap. Seizing the opportunity, the young hunter leaps out and drops a massive canvas sack over the fallen targets. He quickly pulls the heavy material tight, successfully ensnaring both goons before they can recover. Eve brandishes a makeshift baton, telling the hunter to stop grandstanding and finish securing the captives. The hunter turned back to the camera, announcing to his viewers that it's time to trap the dogs and end the threat. Working in perfect sync, the duo uses their poles to keep the struggling goons pinned down inside the bag. Eve lists off their crimes with icy resolve, recalling every lie and slander they used to frame her. She stands tall over her captives, declaring that this capture is the ultimate price for their betrayal. Meanwhile, Grantham and Aileen arrive at the docks, searching for any sign of Eve's location. They stride past a trail of defeated henchmen, witnessing the aftermath of the previous confrontation. Aileen pauses as her keen ears pick up the sound of a scuffle coming from a nearby building. They approach the heavy metal door of the warehouse, preparing to intervene in the fight. Grantham doesn't bother with a formal entry, sending the door flying open with a powerful kick. Aileen enters first, her instincts telling her that the atmosphere inside is unexpectedly tense. Grantham follows close behind, mocking the remote hideout chosen by their enemies for this ambush. Inside, Eve grows increasingly irritated by the muffled provocations coming from the trapped goons. The investigators share a confused glance as they witness the bizarre scene unfolding before them. Grantham finally steps into the light, announcing their arrival to rescue Eve from her predicament. The hunter quickly shields Eve, warning her that more unknown people are breaching their position. A hand reaches out to slide open the inner security gate, revealing the newcomers to the duo. Grantham's dramatic entrance is cut short as his foot lands right in the middle of the oil slick. Aileen barely manages to catch the investigator before he hits the floor, leaving Eve looking on in total shock. Seeing that the immediate danger has passed, Eve turns to the camera to officially end the broadcast. She waves off the hunter's complaints as she shuts down the livestream equipment with a flick of her wrist. Eve gives a sharp, no-nonsense look, daring anyone to challenge her decision to stop filming. With the cameras off, the hunter gives the tied-up goons a final kick for good measure. Eve offers a brief apology to Grantham, explaining they had to take extreme precautions to stay safe. Grantham manages a sheepish smile, admitting that his own lack of caution was the real problem here. Aileen observes the group with her arms crossed, commenting on how fragile their situation actually was. A sudden realization hits Eve, her hand flying to her throat as she notices someone vital is missing. Aileen places a steadying hand on her shoulder, assuring her that the main mastermind is being handled elsewhere. Eve's mind begins to race as she wonders why Valent hasn't come to her side yet. Her heart sinks as she realizes he must have gone to confront the rival vampire alone. Without a second thought, Eve turns and bolts toward the exit, determined to find him. Aileen calls out in alarm, trying to stop the girl from running headlong into a dangerous battle. Eve's heels screech against the concrete as she comes to a sudden, determined halt at the door. She looks back with a worried expression, knowing that Valent is currently facing the real fight of his life. Aileen stands firm, warning Eve that this battle is far beyond her capabilities as a human. Desperate to reach Valenti, Eve tightly grips Aileen's hands in a silent plea for understanding. She argues that if the roles were reversed, Aileen wouldn't be able to just hide away while someone she cared for was in danger. Eve's eyes burn with a fierce determination that catches the investigator off guard. Aileen stares back, suddenly questioning the depth of the bond forming between a human and a vampire descendant. She quickly shakes the thought away, finding the idea of such a connection statistically impossible. Realizing she can't stop her, Aileen finally releases Eve's hand so they can move forward together. Nearby, a defeated goon lies broken on the pavement, his blood staining the concrete. He gasps for air, his face battered and bruised from the one-sided slaughter. A cold-eyed bodyguard looms over him, pinning the man down with a heavy boot to ensure he doesn't move. The pressure of the soul increases, grinding the operative further into the dirt. Valent stands nearby, calmly wiping the crimson stains from his hands with a pristine white cloth. He tosses the soiled fabric aside with a gesture of pure indifference toward his fallen enemies. Despite his injuries, The goon manages a bloody smirk, mocking the high-ranking vampire for working for a human. He taunts Valente, questioning how long a predator can truly suppress his innate craving for fresh blood. The man warns that when the thirst finally takes over, everyone close to him will be the first to die. He specifically targets Valente's weakness, mentioning the girl he's been so desperately trying to protect. Valente's expression hardens into a mask of lethal intent as he decides this conversation is over. A sudden sharp glint of light catches the corner of Valente's eye, signaling a new arrival. Jeffrey steps out from the shadows, wearing a theatrical mask and a confident stride. Valente's jaw tightens as he instantly recognizes the man standing before him. He demands to know how Jeffrey dares to show his face after everything that has happened. A dangerous purple aura begins to swirl around Valente's hand as he declares that no one is leaving this place alive. Jeffrey remains perfectly composed, crossing his arms as if he finds the CEO's threats amusing. He touches down lightly from the air, his movements fluid and unsettlingly calm. The masked intruder mocks Valente for breaking his own rules and losing his legendary composure. Valente dismisses the chatter, focused only on the immediate threat Jeffrey poses. Jeffrey's eyes narrow behind his mask, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The fallen goon struggles against an invisible force, finding the silence imposed upon him utterly degrading. Suddenly, Jeffrey erupts in a surge of dark energy, summoning a massive swarm of spectral bats. The winged creatures streak past the bodyguards, creating a chaotic whirlwind of shadows. Valente raises a hand, conjuring a defensive seal to shield his men from the onslaught. Jeffrey watches the chaos he's unleashed with a chilling, detached curiosity. A massive, vertical tear of dark energy slices through the air, acting as a final barrier. The bodyguards shield their eyes as the sheer force of the magic rattles the entire area. The bats vanish into the bright sky, leaving only silence in their wake. Valente looks toward the empty space where his rival stood just a moment ago. He realizes far too late that the entire flashy display was nothing more than a calculated distraction. His brow furrows as he contemplates the implications of Jeffrey's sudden appearance. Valente concludes that their goal wasn't a fight, but simply to confirm that he is still alive and active. Hidden around the corner, Eve and Aileen witness the aftermath of the supernatural display. Aileen is stunned, unable to believe how quickly Valente recovered from his previous life-threatening injuries. Eve turns to her, her voice hushed as she asks about the identity of the powerful man they just saw. Aileen grabs Eve's arm and starts pulling her toward the center of the clearing. They rush toward Valente, who stands alone amidst the wreckage of the battle. Sensing their presence, Valente begins to turn, his sharp profile illuminated by the sun. Eve doesn't hesitate, closing the distance between them as fast as she can. She looks up at him with pure concern, her hands reaching out to ensure he hasn't sustained any new wounds. The trio finds a brief moment of calm amidst the chaos of the shipyard. Valente leans in, questioning if Eve was truly that concerned for his safety during the fight. Eve quickly defends her actions, reminding him that anyone would have come to help after seeing him in danger. He reaches out with a firm hand, reminding her that she needs to learn her lesson about sneaking out alone. The sudden gesture of a head pat leaves Eve completely flustered and at a loss for words. With a piercing, serious gaze, Valente demands to know if she intends to stay out of trouble from now on. Eve looks up at him, her expression a mix of realization and lingering worry about his condition. Aileen breaks the tension with a sharp, intentional cuff to get their attention back on the mission. Eve turns toward her companion, innocently asking if Aileen might be feeling unwell. Aileen can only sigh at how hopeless and oblivious her friend can be sometimes. The two women exchange a serious look as they prepare to assess the current situation of the investigation. Valente stands tall, ready to determine if the immediate threat from the rival vampires has finally passed. He catches Eve's eye, signaling that it is time for them to move to a more private location. As they walk away, Eve can't help but feel there's something mysterious about the way they are handling the case. Valente's expression hardens as he confirms that Jeffrey personally came to rescue the vampire mastermind. Aileen crosses her arms, processing the fact that her eyes didn't deceive her during the earlier skirmish. She recalls the heavy toll their predecessors took on the enemy 50 years ago, leaving him severely injured. It seems impossible for a vampire to recover from such wounds so quickly without unknown methods. Valente stands his ground, his presence commanding as he prepares to explain the reality of their situation. He warns Aileen that her understanding of the Blood Clan's true abilities is far too limited. Suddenly, Eve's phone buzzes with a notification that catches her completely off guard. She stares in disbelief at a trending post making wild claims about a love-hate relationship between her and a murderer. Her thumb trembles as she scrolls through the endless stream of public comments on her screen. The internet is buzzing with ridiculous theories mocking the Dragon Slayer for being worthless in front of her. Frustration boils over as she realizes how quickly a massive misunderstanding can spread online. Before she can react further, Valente's hand sweeps in and confiscates the device from her. He asks with a dry wit if she was planning to literally bite her phone out of sheer anger. Eve tries to play it cool, claiming she was just watching a harmless video to pass the time. Valente raises the phone to his eye level, reading the absurd dog training labels for himself. Eve slumps her shoulders, feeling defeated because no one seems to care about her side of the story. She insists with a blush that there is absolutely nothing romantic going on between them. Aileen steps in, wondering why Eve is getting into such a frantic panic over social media gossip. The young woman explodes in a fit of chibi-style annoyance, tired of her friends joining in on the teasing. Grantham arrives to report that the human masterminds have finally been taken away for questioning. However, he is immediately distracted by the same viral notification popping up on his own phone. Eve lunges forward with a shout, desperately trying to stop him from looking at the trending rumors. Grantham looks heartbroken, feeling as though Eve has formed a special bond with someone else behind his back. He storms off in a dramatic huff, while Eve frantically tries to chase him down to explain. Valant watches the chaotic drama unfold with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. He immediately orders his subordinate to ensure that the video is wiped from the entire internet. Aileen watches the pair run off, noting that the day's events are at least temporarily over. She stands beside Valente, acknowledging that they have successfully managed the immediate crisis. Still, she makes it clear that he will remain under strict surveillance despite his help today. Valente remains stoic, stating his only priority was ensuring Eve's protection during the encounter. His sharp eyes suddenly lock onto a specific detail he hadn't noticed on the investigator before. Aileen reaches up to her ear, where a mysterious red gem glimmers under the sunlight. Valente moves with predatory speed, his hand reaching toward Aileen's face as she exhales in exhaustion. Nearby, Eve stretches out her arms, finally feeling the weight of the day's fatigue setting in. She freezes mid-stretch as her eyes widen in surprise at the sudden physical proximity between the two. She calls out in confusion, demanding to know what her boss is doing to the investigator. Valente's gaze narrows as he focuses intently on the unique accessory Aileen is wearing. Sensing the heightened tension, he suddenly pulls back and dismisses the moment with a cold nothing. His assistant remains confused, wondering exactly what caught the powerful CEO's eye during the encounter. Valente turns his attention back to Eve, suggesting that he arrange for someone to take her home safely. Eve stands her ground, informing him that she intends to stay at Aileen's place for the next few days. To everyone's surprise, Valente closes his eyes and gives his immediate approval to the arrangement. Eve is left stunned by how easily the usually demanding boss complied with her request. Relieved to be away from the chaos, she leans into Aileen, praising her friend's constant reliability. Valente watches them go, offering a final, stern warning for them to remain cautious on their way. As the day ends, Eve stretches her arms in the fading light, relieved that the immediate tension has passed. However, a lingering thought bothers her as she recalls Valente's strange fixation on Aileen's jewelry. The two friends walk together, discussing the odd and unpredictable behavior of the vampires. Aileen's expression turns grave as she warns Eve to maintain a strict professional distance from the CEO. Taking her hand, Aileen reminds Eve that they are family, and it is her duty to keep her safe. She admits that she worries whenever Eve tries to handle such dangerous situations on her own. Gently patting Eve's head, Aileen reflects on how much her young friend has truly grown up. She looks at the red gem earring, a significant gift she gave to Eve when they were children. The next morning begins at the local stray animal shelter, a place of quiet refuge. Eve arrives early, curious why their planned shopping trip started at this facility instead. Aileen holds up a stack of documents regarding the shelter's latest operations and funding. She explains that a new batch of donations has arrived and she needs to check in with the director. Eve waits patiently, her curiosity piqued by the sudden influx of support for the animals. She picks up one of the donation logs to see who has been funding the shelter's mission. Her eyes scan the formal document, looking for a familiar name among the contributors. A look of pure shock crosses her face as she realizes who the mystery donor is. The paper clearly lists Valente as the primary benefactor, leaving Eve completely baffled by his charity. Nearby, Valente walks through the hallway, his presence commanding even in this humble setting. He crosses paths with Aileen, and both acknowledge they have important matters to discuss. Showing a rare moment of professional courtesy, Valente invites her to speak her piece first. Aileen reports that while Campbell is under suspicion, the police lack the evidence for a conviction. Valente absorbs the news silently, closing his eyes to process the strategic setback. He then shifts the conversation, asking what Aileen originally intended to bring to his attention. Their meeting is interrupted by a shelter staff member who urgently needs Aileen's confirmation. The two professionals pause their high-stakes talk as the mundane world intrudes on their business. Aileen excuses herself to handle the administrative task, leaving Valente with his thoughts. Valente's bodyguard questions why he hasn't simply confronted Aileen about the mysterious gem. Valente explains that the ancient rift between hunters and vampires makes direct trust impossible. He knows that a direct approach would only cause her to become more defensive and guarded. Through a nearby window, Eve spots him and waves enthusiastically to get his attention. Valente remains firm, insisting that Eve is an ordinary human who must be kept out of their conflict. The bodyguard warns that their enemies, like Jeffrey, may still try to use her as a target. Valente's eyes harden as he prepares to face whatever schemes his rivals might throw his way. Eve approaches him outside, still amazed that they've met at the shelter by coincidence. She holds up a bag of cat food and asks the CEO if he'd like to join her in feeding them. To the surprise of everyone present, Valente reaches out to accept the bag of treats. His bodyguard watches in disbelief, unable to reconcile this domestic scene with his master's power. The guard realizes that Valente likely manufactured this coincidence, just to spend time near Eve. Suddenly, the suspicious Mr. Campbell appears, cornering the bodyguard for a private word. Campbell stares him down, accusing the guard of failing his primary duties to the company. He demands to know why Eve is being allowed to get so close to the president. The guard defends himself, noting that it was actually Valant who sought her out first. To avoid a larger scene, the bodyguard simply takes the blame and promises to be more careful. As Campbell walks away, the scene shifts to the tranquil sight of the duo feeding the shelter cats. Eve smiles brightly as she cradles a small cat, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere with Valenta. From the shadows, Campbell watches them with a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. He clutches his arm and sees, vowing that their luck is eventually going to run out.